Hello, everyone. Welcome to a late night, Sunday night. We're hanging out, just shooting the shit and talking about whatever. I don't know. There were some questions about. There was some discussion about Powered by the Apocalypse and specifically Avatar Legends, and we've talked about that system a couple of times on this channel, and we've never really gotten quite into the combat exchange system there. And I was like, oh, I could explain all this, or I could just hop on the stream real quick and we could just talk about it. So that's kind of what we're here to do. But also, other random thoughts that are sort of spilling and going through my head. Meanwhile, I'm like distracted because number one, I've been trying to cut a promo, if you will, for our Southern Beaches Pathfinder 2nd Edition campaign, which just kicked off this week. I think we had like 15 games or something crazy in the first week, which is awesome. But also, there's a thriving conversation that going on in my Discord as we speak about FBT and mechanical role play and Vin's on U.S. time, so it's crazy. Because then he's posting like a madman. So anyways, just a lot of cool, exciting things going on. So anyways, I'm feeling better. I still don't think I'm 100%, but I definitely feel better, which is a good thing. But I'm definitely looking forward to just hanging out with you all and talking about some stuff. Anyways. Let's give some quick shout outs here. Who do we got here? We got Kyle says, talking about Pasión de las Pasiones. Man, that was a fast reaction. Derek seems really into it. So there was some brief conversations. Actually a game I do not own, actually. Although I should probably take a look at it. Isaiah enjoying the chill beats. Pathfinder PhD says, chill indeed. Jackal, what is up? Good to see you. Locanor, good morning. Nice to catch a stream live. Yeah, it's awesome. A little late night stream, a little early Monday morning for you. Fantastic. Mark saying, I'm going to put him asleep. Well, that is also pretty good. Hey, whatever floats your boat, whatever I can do for you, let me know. Don't know how long you can hang out today. All right. Well, we're glad you're here. Good evening to you, Mr. Ben. What's up, Kyle? Hello. Pepper, good to see you. Roll for Combat is here with a late night. Yes, late night, hanging out. Quest friend, hello, howdy. Thaddeus, hello to you as well. And what up? What up, Gonza? So yeah, again, I don't really have a specific exact agenda here, but I did kind of want to talk about something that a lot of people, and basically where the conversation kind of started was, and sort of something that has really been gripping my brain for a while, is there is something intrinsic about Powered by the Apocalypse that I really, really like. And it's not the 2d6 and it's not the bell curve distribution. All right. The thing that I absolutely love, the two things that I absolutely love about Powered by the Apocalypse. One is that the GM doesn't have to roll any dice. And I know that is just like a personal thing for me, but I love even though it's random, I love the sense of empowerment that the dice are in the player's hands. I want the players to roll the dice. Rolling dice is exciting. Rolling dice is like, that's where the spotlight is. And I almost always want the spotlight to be on my players. I kind of don't really, even no matter what the genre of the game is, I really like it when the spotlight is on the players. Also, quite frankly, I can't be bothered to roll all these dice. And also, there's a sense of ownership. Like, even if the dice roll badly, it's like the player kind of feels like, well, it was kind of my fault. I shouldn't have rolled like shit. So I really like the idea of players rolling dice. And in Powered by the Apocalypse games, GMs don't have to do that. And of course, the other thing that I like about Powered by the Apocalypse games is this idea of the 3 tiers of success. And of course, the language itself of the game is problematic because it typically calls it, right, a hit, a full hit, a partial hit, and a miss. And those are like the worst terms that you could ever imagine doing, because we equate that to D&D basically. And even the terms full hit, partial hit, miss, it sounds like hit for full damage, hit for half damage, and then miss for 0 damage. And so we're sort of ingrained into this. And of course, the idea is that that's not what that should mean at all. And there's some more modern games, Thirsty Sword Lesbians in particular, that do a much better job of explaining to that. In fact, in all 3 of those scenarios, hit, partial hit, miss, the net effect could be you fully succeed. You fully succeed in all 3 of those situations. And so, of course, the question is, well, why are we rolling dice then if we're just going to hit? And, this gets back to a very controversial video that we did a long time ago called, why missing or why failure is not fun or something, or why missing is not fun. I'm not saying that players can't miss. I'm just saying it sucks when nothing happens. And so really what the dice roll isn't to see if you succeed or not. The dice roll is to see what consequences occur because of your actions. So when you get a full hit or a upbeat, the idea is you get everything that you wanted and there's no consequence for you. There's no downside. So you get what you want and you don't have to pay anything for it. As you move down the ladder and you move into the partial hit, the idea is that you still get what you want, but it comes with a cost, or it comes with a consequence, or it comes with an asking price. And suddenly now you have to make a more nuanced and informed decision, or you have to pay a consequence. And then when you roll a 6-, of course, the idea there is that the GM gets to decide what happens. And the GM is going to be operating on their principles and their agendas. Because at the end of the day, those are the most, and that's true for any game. That doesn't have to be, Powered by the Apocalypse games are very, upfront and in your face about this is what your principles are as a game master. This is your agenda. This is what you're trying to deliver. And so if there's any sort of overarching core rule set in Powered by the Apocalypse, really it's the agenda and principle of the GM, because that's where you're going to decide the moment. And so a great example of this is if we're playing, let me give you a classic example of this, okay? Of where I would take this and how the fiction changes. But it's also, at the end of the day, it's really just tying back to my understanding of the principles and agendas of a game. So let's say we're playing Dungeon World, and the principles and agendas of a GM in Dungeon World are, kind of taking this idea of heroic fantasy adventure. So, I want to show I want to make the PCs feel like they're, heroic badasses. And I want the PCs to be the stars of the show. But I also want the PCs' lives to be filled with danger and excitement. So this is where this idea of fictional positioning comes in. If your character is, say, going into combat against, there's endless swarms of goblins, right? Think like Lord of the Rings in Moria scene, right? Just hordes of goblins pouring in. Well, then when your character rolls a 6-, I'm not going to say you miss. Your character is this awesome skilled warrior, or this amazing, incredible ranger. You're not going to miss a goblin. Hell, you might still even kill a goblin. But the consequence is that as you're doing that, that's when the cave troll busts in. And it's really more of a narrative consequence than a actual game consequence. It still happened because of your bad roll, but it didn't make you look, not proficient. But on a similar token, if we were in a situation where the party is, say, fighting that cave troll and you roll a 6-, I might say, your sword bounces off of its thick, hard, thick skin like nothing, and then the creature smashes you in the face, and you go flying across the tomb, crashing into the wall, dazed, stunned, and a nearby Moria goblin sees you and picks up his dagger and goes to kill you. And then I switch to Aragorn. Aragorn, what do you do? And if you remember this scene in the movie, Aragorn throws his sword end over end and he kills the goblin while Boromir is shaking his head off. Anyways, and the reason is because I'm fine in that moment against a big, huge, hulking cave troll of making the character, seem less proficient and making this thing feel like more of a threat. Now, of course, games like Blades in the Dark kind of, do something similar with the idea of controlled and risky and desperate positions. But there is still this core issue with Powered by the Apocalypse, which is that ultimately it is tough to do combat. And in other Powered by the Apocalypse games, this doesn't really matter that much because a combat in, say, Monster Hearts typically isn't really even it's not going to be this round by round thing. It's not every player is going to want to try to get in and do something in a combat. It's usually going to be like, you're werewolf, but you're hidden as a werewolf. You're in the locker room after school, and then you see that the group of jocks who always tease you and kind of give you shit. They're beating up some other kid, some other nerdy kid, and I ask you, what do you do? And now you're a werewolf, but you also don't want to kill these people because you're like still a person, and so you get over there and get in their face, and then there's some conversation in fiction, and we get to a point where I said, okay, you're going aggro. All right, make one roll, and you roll a success with a complication, and so I describe how you kick the shit out of these guys, but it's like that scene from the first Spider-Man movie with Tobey Maguire, where like you kick their ass a little bit too much, and suddenly they're looking at you strangely, like, what's wrong with you? You're a freak. So you got what you wanted, but it had this weird consequence. Anyways, that's fine. We did the whole fight in one roll. When you're playing a game like D&D or D&D-like games, Fantasy Heartbreakers, or Avatar, where everybody is a cool, badass martial arts bender. You're working as a team. You're part of a party. It's a lot harder to do that because everybody wants to do something, right? And it's like, I want to do this while he's doing this, while she's doing that, while she's doing that. And we all want to help, and we all want to participate, and we all want to be part of the fun. And so that is, I think it's an intrinsic desire in people who play these games, especially in these team-based games, D&D being the first and foremost amongst them, but even inside of Avatar. Now, similarly, or I should say alternatively, I do big group fights versus big group fights in games like Blaze in the Dark, Scum and Villainy all the time. In fact, I remember once the group had gotten sick and tired of this rival band of smugglers giving them shit. They tracked them down to their secret base, which was like a floating space Hulk in a sort of asteroid field, hidden. And they found it, and they snuck up with some cloaking field, boarded the ship, and Smith's character had previously been like a hegemonic Marine in a past life, and he had recently acquired like basically Space Marine armor. And anyways, so the group basically went full tactical, and they like fought their way through the corridors, up through the upper decks, breaking their way onto the bridge. We resolved that entire sequence, that entire series of firefights, that entire series of taking cover, shots behind corners and all this stuff with a single group action roll. And we obviously let the results of that roll sort of dictate what happened in this entire extended sequence. Now, for us, that was pretty satisfying. And the reason is because for that game and for that type of thing, you're looking down at your character sheet. You don't have all these cool powers and cool fake feats and cool techniques that you want to use to really make yourself shine in combat, right? Combat is more of an abstract concept. It's not a tactical miniature game, so it's totally fine. Resolving a large combat with a single roll sounds horrible to me. Exactly. And the idea is that if flipping the script a little bit, when you look at a game like D&D, or look at Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Pathfinder 2nd Edition, if you make a request of somebody, it's a single die roll, and its success determines whether they agree to your request or not. That's because those mechanics are trying to minimize that aspect or that portion of the game. So it really depends on what your game is about. Because if you have a game where everybody has all these really cool, powerful combat abilities, and they have all sorts of cool different weapons, and there's all these subtle nuances, then it makes sense that your players are going to want to use those. And so that is innately going to kind of create a desire for everybody to, want to participate and do the thing. So this is sort of what led to this idea of the combat exchange in Avatar. And I think it's really what's the word I'm looking for here? It's really powerful, but I think a lot of people don't quite understand or get why. And so I thought we could just talk a little bit about this. All right. All right. Be all hunker. All right. All right. So there we go. Whereas Derek says, that sounds like 45 minutes where nothing meaningful happened was saved to me. Exactly. People want to know, Derek, how do you get through 2 or 3 scores in a single session? And that's how. All right. So the idea here is that in Avatar Legends, your characters are, cool badass benders or cool badass martial artists. You're going to want to use your cool powers and techniques. All right. The problem is in Powered by the Apocalypse games, once everybody starts doing that, you start rolling the dice a lot. And once you start rolling the dice a lot, you start getting a lot of consequences. You start getting a lot of 6 minuses. You start getting a lot of 7, 8s, and 9s. And it can spiral out of control. Number one, it can become very difficult for the GM to keep track of everything that's happening. But also, too, it can sort of burn out the rubber, so to speak, of how much narrative influence these moves are supposed to have. If 4 people in a single round all roll the dice and you all get a 6 minus, there's only so much narrative consequence that can happen in that very short period of time, right? I'm not going to have a cave troll bust in and then I guess another cave troll and also a bunch of, it just starts to it loses its emphasis. So you want each of these moves to sort of be its own moment, in the scene and not necessarily worry about whether or not, you don't want to necessarily worry. Sorry, I got distracted. I heard something downstairs. Hold on one second. Alrighty, sorry about that. So I'm back. Time to misbehave. No. So the problem is that everybody wants to do something in Powered by the Apocalypse, and nobody has. But the game doesn't. The game kind of breaks down. The other thing, which I've noticed, is that some people, including people in my own group of players, Powered by the Apocalypse can be a little not crunchy enough. The moves can be a little bit too basic, and there's not enough little widgets and little things and little, mechanical doodads that they can pick up. And so Magpie, with both Root and Avatar, they took slightly different approaches here, but with Root and Avatar, they've made crunchier PbtA games. And for the most part, the part that they made crunchier was combat. And that's because in Avatar, while combat is not the focus of Avatar, it certainly comes up, right? Usually at least once or twice an episode, you're going to get into some kind of cool bending fight, right? And the same thing is true with Root. You have these really cool vagabonds that have really fun weapons, and they're mercenaries, they're scoundrels, they're vagabonds. You're going to get into some fights. Again, Root, the RPG is based off of Root the board game, and one of the things the vagabond could do is fight people. So, they know that people are, and the idea is that all the vagabonds are good fighters. And the idea of Avatar is that everybody is a good martial artist. Oh, we're talking about PbtA? Blah. Actually, part of the reason I'm talking about this, Vin, is for you. Because I just want you to at least understand, at least see this, or at least understand this. So the idea is that in Avatar, is if everybody's going to want to do something, we need to do two things. One is we need some form of initiative, unfortunately, because we want everybody to get one chance to do something. The other thing that we want to do is eliminate the consequence spiraling that occurs because people rolled 7, 8, 9, or because people rolled a 6-. And the way they do that in this game is I think, pretty smart. So the idea is a combat exchange, if you want to think about it this way, a combat exchange is a single round of combat. And when I say single round of combat, we should probably divorce ourselves from the 6-second combat round of the modern DM or the modern game. GM Scott, 28 months supporting the adventure. Thank you, GM Scott, with a and rocking that orange GM Scott loyalty badge. GM Scott says the Avatar game we played at Origins last year was the best game of PbtA Blazing the Dark I've ever played in. Of course, it's the only one too. Well, at least it wasn't the worst. By that definition, it was the worst, but at least it wasn't the worst game that you PbtA game that you've ever played. Yeah, that was a fun game. That was a great game. I think that really highlighted a lot of the stuff. Thank you, Scott. So, where was I? Oh, yeah. Because when a lot of people roll dice in PbtA, it creates a lot of problems, and you get into a weird situation. This is actually really this situation is really interesting. So, combat exchanges sort of look more like old school combat rounds. In AD&D first edition or second edition definitely, a combat round was actually a minute long. And the idea was that single attack roll actually represented dozens of that's you and your opponent trading back and forth, blow against blow, you ducking and diving and dipping and weaving and, all this other stuff. And so that entire minute gave you all this time. And of course, especially when you think about the 5th edition character, especially 5th edition. The 5th edition character, you've got your bonus action. You've got your action, which could be multiple attacks. You're moving, and you're moving between all of these different actions. Then you also get your free interact action, right, that you can do once a turn. So you're doing a lot of stuff in a 5th edition combat round, which I think is great. I think it's cool. But that's supposed to take place in 6 seconds? It's craziness. It's nonsense. And so the older idea was that a combat round was, a longer period of time. And that we were essentially, believe it or not, in the older versions of the game, okay, we were kind of abstracting the combat, okay? In other words, my first level fighter, my low level fighter or whatever had one attack per round. So does that mean that in a 1 minute span of time, I only made one attack? No, of course it doesn't. It means that in the course of that, in the course of that combat round of maybe 30 seconds to a minute, it's going back and forth. My character only has the skill to truly land, one blow. And, the one opportunity, exactly, Meba Man, whereas a higher level fighter with multiple attacks around is going to have multiple chances against multiple foes. But the idea is that the attack roll in, say, 2nd edition AD&D actually represented many dozens of attacks or many, a whole sequence of movements and maneuvers. There's an example, it's Sunday night. Who the hell cares? Self-confessed cynic coming in for 28. And see, Vin, this is why you and I get along so well, because I was literally like, it's Sunday night and we're not doing anything else. Let me open up the 2nd edition player's handbook so we can take a look at this. Because is that explanation of the time abstraction for older editions in any of the rule books? Would love to read how they explained it. And I was just thinking, let's go do that because, what else are we doing here? If we're not doing this. Stream element sounds are super low. Well, I don't know why. I don't know why. It remains to be seen. I can hear it just fine. output capture. All right, let's do some. Let's see here.
I am strong. Strong.
All right.
Strong.
Hopefully that's better. All right. Player's handbook. I wish idle cover. Ooh, found it. Okay. Boom. All right. So here we have AD&D Second Edition Player's Handbook. And let's go. Now, to be fair, what I'm thinking of actually might be in the Dungeon Master's Guide. So I just want to make sure here. All right. Yep. Here we go. Perfect. Okay. Let's read it. If an encounter escalates into a combat situation, the time scale of the game automatically goes to rounds, also called melee rounds or combat rounds. Rounds are used to measure the actions of a character in combat or other intensive actions in which time is important. A round is approximately 1 minute long. 10 combat rounds equals a turn, or put another way, a turn equals 10 minutes of game time. This is particularly important to remember for spells that last for turns rather than rounds. But already we're off the beaten path here. But these are just approximations. Precise time measurements are impossible to make in combat. Any action that, or an action that might be ridiculously easy under normal circumstances could become an undertaking of truly heroic scale when attempted in the middle of a furious, chaotic battle. Holy cow, 3 columns. Look, they had to fit the text in somehow, okay? Back when D&D art was good. Shout out, I'll skip back. I'll skip to my favorite piece of artwork of all time, by the way. What's going on with that indent, by the way? What indent? Is this Gygax writing? It is not. It is not. This AD&D Second Edition, the primary author was David Zeb Cook. Now, you may know Cook because you may know BXD&D. Now, BXD&D refers to the magenta box set that came out in 1981, which is kind of the basis for most of the modern OSR type games that harken back to D&D. Some of them go all the way back to 0th edition. And of course, now we have the second generation and the new SR, as they call it. But BXD&D stands for Basic Expert D&D. It's different from BECMI D&D, which came out in 1985. Now, BECMI D&D is usually called Menser B&D because it's named after Dave Menser, I think, who, or maybe it's Dave Menser? Frank Menser, who wrote that version of BASIC. But the 1981 version of BASIC, BX D&D, was written by Moldvay and Cook. And that Cook is Dave Cook, not Monty Cook. So, yeah, so it's David Zeb Cook. That first paragraph of that section is indented 2/3 of the line. Oh, that I don't know, Derek. I can't actually describe that. All right. So, imagine the simple act of imbibing a healing potion. First, a character decides to drink the potion before retiring for the night. All he has to do is get out of his backpack, uncork it, and drink the contents. No problem. Now, imagine the same thing in the middle of a fight. The potion is safely stowed in the character's backpack. First, he takes stock of the situation to see if anyone else can get the potion out for him. But, not surprisingly, everyone is busy. So, sword in one hand, he shrugs one strap of the pack off his shoulder. Then, just as 2 orcs leap toward him, the other strap threatens to slip down, entangling his sword arm. Already, the loose strap keeps him from fully using his shield. Holding the shield as best as possible in front of him, he scrambles backwards to avoid the monster's first wild swings. He gets pushed back a few more feet when a companion shoulders past to block their advance. His companion bought him a little time, so he kneels, lays down his sword, and slips the backpack all the way off. Hearing a wild cry, he instinctively swings his sword up just in time to ward off a glancing blow. Look at that orc. Scary. All right. We gotta shrink this down a little bit. There we go. Come over here. All right, there we go. Rummaging through the pack, he finally finds the potion, pulls it out, and huddling behind his shield, works the cork free. Just then, there is a flash of flame all around him. A fireball! He grits his teeth against the heat, shock, and pain, and tries to remember not to crush or spill the potion. Biting back the pain of the flames, he is relieved to see the potion is still intact. Quickly, he gulps it down, reclaims his sword, kicks his backpack out of the way, and runs back to the front lines. In game terms, the character withdrew, was missed by one attacker, made a successful saving throw versus spell, drank a potion, and was ready for combat the next round. Well, so what can you do in one round? Whatever the precise length of a combat round, a character can accomplish only one basic action in that round, be it attack, cast a spell, drink a potion, tend to a fallen comrade. When making an attack, a character is likely to close with his opponent, circle for an opening, feint here, jab there, block a thrust, leap black, and finally make a telling blow. A spellcaster may fumble for his components, dodge an attacker, mentally review the steps of the spell, intone the spell, and then move to safety when it is all done. It has already been shown what drinking a potion might entail. All of these things might happen in a bit less than a minute, or bit more than a minute, but the standard is 1 minute and one action to the character. So this is basically taking this idea and making it very, sort of intuitive, that we the attack roll, right? I think we've gotten into I think this is very true of most modern sensibilities. We think of the attack roll as being directly connected to a swing of my sword, right? A single moment in the game. And we've, kind of created these discrete moments in especially like take a game like Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the idea that like in the course of my character's turn, I'm falling back and pulling off my backpack and drinking up my potion and doing all this other stuff. It's like, it's mostly just fluff, but it's like, well, you can't move. You're in that square, right? So the idea here is it's actually taking a little bit, more of a laid back approach. And then you can see here, by the way, that this is the way that initiative worked. In real life, combat is one of the closest things to pure anarchy. Each side is attempting to harm the other, essentially causing disorder and chaos. Thus, combats are filled with unknowns, unplanned events, failed attacks, lack of communication, and a general confusion and uncertainty. However, to play a battle in the game, it is necessary to impose some order on the actions occur. Within a combat round, there is a set of steps that must be followed. The steps are: 1. The DM decides what actions the monsters or NPCs will take, including casting spells. 2. The players indicate what their characters will do, including casting spells. 3. Initiative is determined. 4. Attacks are made in order of initiative. So, of course, this is AD&D 2nd Edition, but the GM decides what the NPCs are going to do, then the players decide what they're going to do, and then we roll something to sort of see what happens. Okay? And the idea is that this combat round of a minute actually represents a series of actions. So with that in mind, let's take a look at this. All right. Step by step, this is a combat exchange. 1, the GM chooses approaches. For each non-player combatant in the exchange, the GM should choose an approach. The GM should note these approaches down, but keep them secret. The players don't know yet what the approaches the NPCs chose to get to do. 2, each player chooses an approach. 3, the GM reveals what they chose. And 4 through 5 through 6 is we now roll dice. And we now start resolving what happened in that combat round. So in my expertise, or my sense, I think that the Avatar combat exchange is really more of a throwback to this older style of D&D where, because you're talking about, so no movement or grid. Grid was definitely not a foregone conclusion. Grids really didn't enter into the D&D lexicon as a full frontal battle mat thing until 3rd edition. You will not see anything in this rules section, to the best of my knowledge, that really talks about, grids and movements. You obviously have a minute long, it's like it says here, since a round is roughly a minute long, it should be easy for a character to move just about anywhere he wants during the course of a round. After all, Olympic class sprinters can cover vast amounts of distances in a single minute. However, we are not Olympic class sprinters, and we're not sprinting in a straight line. We're trying to maneuver through a battle without being killed. He's keeping his eyes open for trouble, avoiding surprise, watching his back, watching the back of his partners, looking for a good opening, blah, 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 blah. All right. So, and so you can see here that if a character had a movement rate of 9, which is pretty standard, because usually your movement rate was 12, but it was usually reduced by armor, they can move up to 90 feet in a round. But remember, a round is a minute. So again, the idea here is that it's a much more, abstracted. And the base sort of assumption, and that wasn't necessarily that you were using that. And it was, I know that when I grew up, it wasn't until Combat and Tactics came out, the AD&D second edition book. I don't know that I have this one on this PDF, but it wasn't until this book came out, okay, that this was the first time that, and I know that the first edition D&D game talked about it a little bit, but this was the first time that you could see here, this page here, I don't know how well it'll show up, the battle mat, figures and facing, tiny squares, medium-sized creatures occupy a single, oh, here. I mean, this is everything that you need to see. So this is what we now think of as sort of modern D&D. I should note that in Combat and Tactics, though, you had a facing. So your flanks were actually determined by your model's flanks, not by whether or not there was somebody on the left and right side of you. Anyways, and again, you see these examples of combat that start to look a lot more like what we think of as combat. And I think, personally, this came out in 94. So I think that the evolution of video games and the way that people perceived D&D, and I don't know exactly when Diablo came out. When did Diablo release? Okay, Diablo didn't come out until 97, or 96, sorry. But either way, I think that the video games were sort of moving in that direction. I think that's what people kind of expected. They wanted this sort of, again, a game became more about this tactical movement. In a sense, in second edition, at least played as, presented in the book, a combat round was this sort of amorphous time period. Sure, mechanically, in the game mechanics, your character was going to roll a single d20 and only be able to apply their damage once. But in the fiction of the game, we're dodging, we're ducking, we're parrying, shields are clattering, axes are banging into one another, and then, we scoop them low and we, gut them in the stomach. So Avatar Legends does the same exact thing. And what Avatar Legends actually does is it does do a couple of different things, which is the idea that a combat exchange represents a period of time, which I would describe as the length of, a quick montage or scene in a show or a TV or an anime, where you kind of get to see what everybody's kind of doing. And obviously the camera, sometimes you get those nice group wide shots, but usually there's kind of like a series of quick vignettes, showing, Katara whips up some water whips that boom, 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 knock a bunch of people down. Aang flips up onto an air scooter and starts zipping around, right? We see these quick little, moments. And they're sort of all happening simultaneously. And then the difference here is this combat exchange represents, sure, you might only make one attack in it, but it really represents a series of attacks. So when you're a firebender, let me see if I can pull this up here. I got some cheat sheets. Okay, there we go. Okay, so when your firebender chooses the advance and attack, what's it called? Jeez, it's not called a maneuver. My brain is farting. Approach. So when your Razors chooses the advanced attack and they choose strike, mechanically, game-wise, it says strike a foe in reach, force them to mark 2 fatigue or a condition, or shift their balance away from center, their choice. All right. Mark a fatigue for yourself to instead choose to hammer them with your blows, forcing them to take 2 fatigue or a strike where they are weak, inflicting a condition. Okay. in mechanical terms, you're making one strike. But the idea is that this combat exchange represents, it's your character, thrusting forward with powerful fists, about, a blast of flame, a blast of flame, a blast of flame. And then you spin around with your kick and you drop a massive, wake of fire that strikes the character. And, and you can even describe like, okay, I'm just throwing fireballs at them. Right. And I'm going to let the opponent, presumably an NPC, choose to mark 2 fatigue, a condition, or shift their balance. But if I want to describe me marking a fatigue so that I get to pick which they choose, that might be me blasting. And I can see that the person's sort of dodging and weaving and like they're throwing up earth, blasts, earth defenses. And then I go, I gather my energy, sort of me spending my fatigue. I do the quick spinning back roundhouse kick, massive wake of fire that hits them full on, breaking through their little rock interceptors because it's just a big wake of fire. And I force them to take 2 fatigue. So what's happening here is this is why this is so weird. And this is in my personal opinion. Combat exchanges in Avatar take a break from, I want to make sure I say this right. I don't want to go to the whiteboard just yet, but maybe we need to go to the whiteboard. We all know that Powered by the Apocalypse games are fiction first, right? It's all about the fiction. And then, the mechanics trigger from the fiction, and then we go back into the fiction. What I am suggesting is that combat exchanges in Avatar are actually mechanics first. But what it really is it's one really big fucking complicated move. Okay? It's just like the group check from Blaze in the Dark, but instead of the group check, being like, we shoot people and I support him and you're adding a D6 to the die pool, right? Or I'm adding 2D6 to the dice pool. Instead of doing that, it is a group check with a lot of little intricacies and a lot of little steps. And it's a group check that allows your firebenders who know all these different techniques to bust them out, right? And so these techniques are obtained throughout the game. They're actually obtained diegetically. You don't just get them for leveling up or anything like that. You have to learn these techniques. But, it gives you all these little fun, mechanical, tactical little knobs to play with. But what it really is doing is it's just making a gigantic, big-ass move. All right. We got... Let's see what we got here. All right. All right. All right. Go old school here. So we did have a super chat from GM Scott, who apparently went and looked it up. And we also had a tip from GM Scott. Hey, what's up, GM Scott?
GM Scott tipped $50. I've been too busy to catch the past few streams live. Had to watch the VODs. Thanks for the great content. Anyway, nothing against Boothby, but here's for some more first looks of upcoming games.
All right. Well, GM Scott, I love to tease Boothby, but the fact is people really do love first looks. So I appreciate the support. Thank you so much for that. I know you've been busy vacationing and probably busy with some other stuff. So it's totally fine. I look forward to it. My main goal, GM Scott, is now that things have started to calm back down again. I want to play some more games with you guys, especially Scott. Scott was a lot of fun to play with. Both in our Avatar game, I got to play Shadow Dark with him. So he's a fun guy to play with. So, but Scott said yes, the AD&D first edition DMGI, it was there too. Okay, so they were talking about it back then, which is good to know. But AD&D second edition was more of an evolution. So, anyways, so what I was saying is that, right? So in standard PbtA, you have this idea of the fiction, and we are having a conversation, right? This is the conversation. And we're just talking. We're going back and forth. We're going back and forth. We're going back and forth. And at a certain point, something happens in the fiction, right, that triggers a move. And at that point, we actually stop talking about the fiction and we move into a black box, a very procedural moment where the game mechanics enter. And of course, in most PbtA games, you're going to roll 2d6, you're going to add a modifier, and then we're going to look at that particular move that triggered, and we're going to see what happens on a 10 plus, what happens on a 7 to 9, and what happens on a 6 minus, right? And then after these mechanical effects, so we're going to apply, and then we're going to apply the mechanics. And then we go back to the fiction, right? And now this fiction has been influenced. It's been changed. It's because, right, we have to make what just happened due to this move make sense in the context of the fiction. So we have this, procedural element. Most people are familiar with that with PbtA. Okay. What I am saying is that this box, okay, if you do it a bunch, can become problematic. All right. Because if this box instead looks like this, where you have 4 or 5 different PCs all doing their move, it becomes muddy because each one needs to link back to the fiction and it just becomes a lot of work. Doing the mechanical application is easy, but doing the fictional application is very hard. And this is why I think Dungeon World and stuff struggle with this when everybody wants to do their move. So what I am suggesting is that in Avatar, okay, we have our fiction and we're having a conversation. And at some point, a move triggers. And the move is basically, whenever you and your squad are about to get into are about to fight another squad that wants to fight you, or fight somebody who wants to fight you, then do this move. Okay. And to be clear, if I was playing Blades in the Dark, I would do the same thing, right? If you and your crew of PCs was about to get into a fight with another group of NPCs, I would more than likely resolve that element of the combat with a single group check. Okay. And that group check, this is actually I wrote Avatar, but we'll make this Forge in the Dark. Okay. So this would be some sort of, I don't know, it would be a group check. And we would sort of determine what happens from that check mechanically. We would get a big dice pool together. We'd roll 6d6 and we get a 1, 2, 4, 5, 5, 3. Ah, damn, we didn't even get a 6. And so we get a 5, so we get a partial success. So we beat them back, but, and the GM will describe this. Maybe some of you take, grazed by a bullet, the GM assigns out a couple different conditions, because when you participate in a group check, you are also part of the consequence of that. And we could represent this entire stage of the combat being done in this way. Now, it doesn't necessarily have to the scale of it could be anything. It could be small, it could be large, but some of that's going to depend on the tone of your game. It could literally be hundreds of combat. It could be an entire war. It could be an entire campaign represented by a single group check, if that's the type of thing that you want to skip over. Regardless, when this is done, we're going to apply some mechanics to our character sheets, and then, boop, we're going to head back to the fiction. So what Avatar does is we're having the fiction. We get to a point where it says, okay, you and your fellow friends who are all martial arts badasses are about to get into a fight with a group of skilled, also martial arts badasses. And instead of doing a group check, we do a combat exchange. And as opposed to a group check potentially feeling very maybe unsatisfying, because all you're really doing in a group check is you're just adding your d6 to their pool of d6 and everybody's going to roll. And then you take the best one that anybody gets. So it's not necessarily the most exciting thing. But instead, within this combat exchange, okay, we almost kind of stop playing Avatar the PbtA game for just a hot second. Okay, for just a hot second. And instead, we play this really quick little kind of, it's not quite rock, paper, scissors. By the way, if this sounds familiar, it's because this is kind of what Burning Wheel does. But we kind of play this quick rock, paper, scissors kind of, it's not really rock, paper, scissors, but we do this really quick miniature little tactical game. Okay. And that's going to generate some mechanical results. But the most important thing is kind of while this is resolving, in my mind, we aren't describing things in the fiction. We're sort of seeing what everything happens first. And then when the fiction kicks back in after the combat exchange is over, that's when we describe everything all at once. And now we all have the benefit. Me, the players, we all saw what happened, right? We know that this person did this. We know that that person did this. And it's all supposed to be happening simultaneously. So we get to sort of work off of each other, knowing what everybody else did. And we kind of almost go back in time and tell the story of what just happened in that combat exchange. Now, the key difference to, let's say, a combat in a D&D game is that we go back to the fiction after this combat exchange. We don't go immediately into another combat exchange. Now, to be clear, the fiction might be you go immediately back into another combat exchange, right? And if both sides aren't interested in fleeing or talking and you still want to keep fighting, the fiction might be very short indeed, and you might shoot right back into a combat exchange. But what is interesting about this game is it sort of understands that there's sort of this moment, this sort of breakdown. And in a weird way, actually, in a weird way, you can almost look at old school D&D and AD&D and stuff like that. It's kind of actually having a similar thing. You fight one round of combat, right? We'd go through the whole round of combat. But then the combat kind of stops for a moment, right? Because that's when, in these games, you would make a morale check, right? That's where you would go and, determine, okay, we just had that round of combat. It was 1 minute. It was all happening kind of simultaneously. It was crazy. Let's see what happens as a result of that in the fiction. And then we go into the second round of combat. And the second round of combat might start with people just running away. In fact, I'm a big fan of that. Like, I would describe between the combat rounds, because by the way, remember in AD&D second edition, I should reiterate this for people who are not 40 years old. In AD&D second edition, this process here, the DM decides what actions the monsters will take. The players decide what actions they will take. Then we roll initiative. Then we make attacks in initiative order. You do that at the start of every combat round. So initiative is rolled every round. And at the start of every round, before that initiative is rolled, you say, this is what my character is doing. And then we rinse and repeat that step or that process. What I'm saying, though, is I don't think that's in the player's handbook, because this was back when we didn't do that sort of thing, but it might be. But at the end of those combat rounds, there's no morale here. But at the end of those combat rounds, that's when the monsters might flee. They might make a morale check. There was all sorts of different. Your hirelings would make a loyalty check. So there was all these ideas about what was happening between the combat rounds that sort of would influence the next combat round. And I might even describe that as the player, because during steps, one of the things I like to do. This is because I do this same process, by the way, when I play BX D&D, when I play Old School Essentials. I usually play BX D&D still when I run it at cons. When I do step one, I like to telegraph a little bit. And I like to reward, because again, I want to reward player skill and character skill. And so a lot of times I'll kind of give the PCs kind of an indication of roughly, what the monsters are going to do. And representing the fact that their characters are aware of the combat. There's some general sense of it. And so if a bunch of goblins failed their morale check, but the orcs didn't, I might describe in step one that the goblins look left and right, panicked as they start to fall back. The orcs, grimace and takes several steps forward. Okay, what are you guys doing? I haven't really exactly described what the orcs are doing or what the goblins are going to do, but I'm sort of giving the players an indication, and they can kind of use that data or use that information to sort of make a decision. So there is this kind of idea that we have one combat exchange and then we go to another combat exchange and then we go to another combat exchange. Now, of course, in AD&D second edition, it's more or less automatic. And nowadays it's completely automatic, usually until everybody's dead. But in a game like Avatar, and I'll be the first to admit that that's probably maybe not as applicable precisely. Because again, a combat exchange could go immediately into another combat exchange. If you guys are still fighting, you're still fighting. But in a show like Avatar, a lot of times, the characters show up and then there's some, bad guy. And, the bad guy says, I've dealt with you long enough. Now you'll be, get out of my way. And then big blast of fire and you have a combat exchange. The characters do that stuff. And there's always that moment, right? You see it on the show or see it on the TV. There's a flurry of action, right? Doom, 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 doom. And then the action kind of dies down for a moment. This happens even in movies like Marvel, even in the fight versus Thanos at the end of Avengers Endgame. You have these moments between the frantic combat exchange where the characters are essentially having more of a conversation. So, the villain who they don't think, that is misunderstanding them attacks and, the characters all kind of, scatter away. And then the combat exchange is over and Aang says why are you doing this? We're only here to help. And, then the other character, I describe how the NPC says, I've had enough of your help. We don't need the avatar. And then they start to wake another fire. And then we go into another combat exchange. But it could be that we make some actions and some moves. But as I was saying before, the thing about the combat exchange is it's actually a moment where the game stops working. I didn't know this until Gen Con. And I went to a Magpie. I went to a Magpie seminar, and Mark Diaz-Druin was there, and so was the other co-owner of Magpie. And they were talking about combat exchanges. And what I did not realize is that in combat exchanges, while you're in that process of going through this, while you're going through these 7 steps, okay, the basic moves of the game shut off. They do not trigger. You could not, while you are inside of a combat exchange, okay, your character cannot live up to their principle, resist shifting your balance, help, intimidate, push your luck, trick, guide and comfort, rely on your skills and training, assess the situation, plead. These basic moves shut off while you're in that combat exchange. And the reason is because we are so used to PbtA games where everything is the conversation, everything is the fiction. But that's not what's happening. We have to think of the combat exchange as being a single move. And the same way that while we were, let's say we were resolving the guide and comfort move, okay, we would never stop halfway through resolving this move, right, to trigger another move. Right. So somebody goes up to somebody and they're like, oh, you should get over it. And I'll be here to help you. And then you roll with your harmony and, you get a hit. And so we've rolled dice, we're waiting. And now we're waiting to see what the other party is going to do. Are they going to embrace your guidance and comfort, or are they going to shut you down? And then while we're waiting for that, another move triggers. We wouldn't do that. Right. We would wait until the guide and comfort move had completely resolved. And then we would re-enter into the fiction. But I think the same thing is true with these combat exchanges. That's what they intended to do. Is that pretty limiting, though, for the fiction? I mean, it's because it's easier to just mechanically figure out what's happening, Urbane. And then once we're all done with it, then the fiction can catch up, right? So the fiction still matters. It's still important, and we should still do it. And even when we're taking certain actions inside of the, the combat exchange, we still have to respect the fiction to a certain extent. We can't be like, oh, that there's something there that was clearly not there, right? If the GM says you're in the middle of the desert, and then the waterbender's like, I'm going to use my water whip, and the GM's like, well, you can't. There's no water. He's like, I thought the fiction doesn't matter inside the mechanics. Okay. That, I guess maybe that's speaking a little bit too much. But what is important to do is we can't get so caught up in this idea of thinking of each of these moments in the combat exchange as being individual moves. It's one process. It's one group check. And then we sort of catch up with the fiction. So, as an example, and we could see this, by the way, in the dice rolls, okay? Because you still make a dice roll. There's still some uncertainty inside of a technique or inside of a combat exchange, all right? The GM chooses what approaches their NPCs are going to use. Then the players choose what approaches they are going to use. And of course, in this game, you can either defend and maneuver. All right, defend and maneuver, which lets you roll with your focus stat. Then you could advance and attack, or you could evade and observe. Now, mechanically, all this stuff is happening simultaneously. It's just like that 1 minute long combat round. But what we do is we make this stance move. And the beautiful thing about this stance move is all the PCs can roll this at the same time. That shows a certain action. And you'll notice here that this is one of the rare moves that tells you what happens on a miss, aka on a 6-. This means, and by the way, notice the 7, 8, or 9. Use one basic or mastered technique. On a 10+, you can choose from this list. On a miss, meaning you roll a 6 or minus, you stumble, but you can shift your balance away from center to use a basic technique. This stance move, which is the only dice that a player will roll inside of a combat exchange, does not generate GM moves. It doesn't. It doesn't even generate partial. It doesn't generate a success with a complication or success at a cost. Right? It's entirely player facing, and it's designed so that way I can have 3 people at my table who are all advancing and attacking. They can all roll their stance rolls at once. They all roll 6-, and 2 of them choose to shift their center or shift their balance so that they can use a basic techniques. And then the other person says, I'm good just doing nothing this round, but they could always choose to, shift their balance and still do something. But normally the GM would have had to make 3 separate moves, and they would have to do all this other stuff, blah, 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 blah. So this lets us quickly, now, by the way, while they're going through it, so let's imagine what this looks like. So I, as the GM, I decide, okay, let's just imagine, like a classic thing. It's Aang, right? The airbender. It's Zuko, the firebender, or no, we'll make it Aang, Katara, and Toph. Okay. Very basic. Pathfinder, take care, buddy. So Aang, Katara, Toph, airbender, waterbender, earthbender. And they're fighting, let's say, Zuko. Okay. Or Azula or something. So Azula goes first, and she chooses to retaliate. Now, as an NPC, by the way, she just gets to do her move. It's one of the cool things about being an NPC. So, and but here's the thing. Rather than try to describe it in the fiction, I really just kind of say, like, she's retaliating, and this mechanical effect comes into play. Each time a foe inflicts fatigue, condition, or shifts your balance, we inflict 1 fatigue back on them. And then we get to the advance and attack. And let's say all 3 of our heroes chose to strike. Okay? So what they're going to do, well, they chose to advance and attack. So they are all going to roll this stance move at the same time with passion. And let's say we get a couple 7s and 9s, we get a 10+, we get a miss, they shift their balance. They all end up striking. Okay? So they strike, they strike, they strike. And in the fiction, right, Azula is marking fatigue, she's marking conditions, she's shifting her balance. And at the same time, every time that they are inflicting fatigue or condition or shifting her balance, she's inflicting a fatigue back on her. But we're not really too worried about the description of this yet. Again, I'm making this a very simple example. Okay. So now at the end, by the way, even if Azula went last, if she got knocked out here, she still gets to take her turn. Because none of the mechanics, none of the fiction catches up until we're entirely done with the situation. Okay. We get to the end of the step. All right. We get to the end of the combat exchange. 7. All characters who lost their balance or were taken out now resolve those results. So we look and we see that Azula's not taken out, but she did do a bunch of infliction of fatigue because she retaliated. Now, as a group, we describe what that looks like, right? And this is where you get to have fun with it. Like Aang is describing how he's, spinning through the air, blasting her with wind. She's not really attacking. She's more of just like, and she's like shooting back fire, boom, 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 boom. And, and Aang hits her just as a fire blast hits him, and she's spiraling. And then, Katara and Toph are coming in, and just as they're like shooting down water and earth blasts, Azula kind of opens up her arms and a blast of fire comes out and hits those two. And mechanically what happened is everybody took a fatigue, and Azula took some conditions and fatigue. But what we did is we told a story about that mechanic after the fact. It's kind of a weird way to think about an RPG, but it's this idea that we do the mechanics first and then we tell the story later. Charles says the parallel to Burning Wheel combat arguments is apt, though. It helps me picture what you're getting at really well. Yes, it is kind of similar in that way. And then Jackal says it's Strike all the way down. Yes, it is kind of Strike. Strike, by the way, does something very similar, where in Strike, you play out an entire tactical combat, a la grids and squares, a la 4th edition with powers and all this other stuff. But while you're playing it, all you're doing is keeping track of how many strikes that your side has. Right? What happens in the tactical combat doesn't really matter that much. What matters is how many strikes you accumulate. And you accumulate strikes for, getting bloodied. You accumulate strikes for getting, knocked down to 0. At the end of the combat, we total up how many strikes you got, and we total up how many strikes the opposing side got. And then we look at them and we say, and this is what happened as a result of that combat. So it's very much like Strike in that regard, Jackal. Except instead of doing an entire multi-round 4E style combat, we're doing a fairly short-ish quick combat exchange. It sounds like an attack roll without the GM move. Yeah, George, actually, while we're inside the combat exchange process, the GM moves stop happening. And we do that so that we can quickly get through it, kind of tell this cool story, and then get back to the fiction. One last thing, though, before I go. Perhaps you could compare blow for blow to the Rules Lawyer video. I know which video we're talking about. It's one of his best. I actually really love that, that video. Recently, I heard someone say they're kind of tired of the whole is it fiction or mechanics first, instead proposing that it's justifying the connection between the two that matters. I agree with that to a certain extent. Certainly I believe fully that the two should meet. But I think it's natural that one comes first. I maybe that's why it's, and also too, the idea is if you had to pick between which one is more important, the fiction or the mechanics, which one wins? And it's very rare that you're going to say, well, none win, right? So I'll give you an example. This is the best example I can ever give for you. Okay. All right. I've given this example before, so I apologize. Not really, but for my background, let me get a grid. All right. So we were playing 4th edition D&D. Okay. And we're inside of a room. Okay. And there's like a door here and like a door here and like a door here. And there's some sort of, combat occurring, right? With, monsters here and here and here, and maybe like monsters here and here. And then we have our PCs, right? Let me make their PCs super heroic, right? And we have our PCs here and here and here and here and there. Okay. And at some point during the course of this combat, one of the characters, a bard, I believe, cast in what's called in the game an illusory wall. Now, an illusory wall of 4th edition has a very specific mechanical effect. Your party and allies can see through it because they know it's not a real wall. And any other enemy you attack it, if they want to pass through the wall, they have to make a will save. It's not really a will save. You actually attack their will. If you fail, they can ignore the wall. So in this situation, it causes these guys to kind of get cut off. But in this situation, another new enemy entered the battlefield. Okay, right here. And he saw the illusory wall, and he thought it was a real wall. Then, and this is where it gets crazy. Remember, my PCs can see through the wall. The bard cast a ranged bard attack spell on it, which is called Misdirected Mark. Okay. Now, Misdirected Mark is a ranged bard attack spell. It does some psychic damage. Okay. And then, as a bonus effect, it causes the monster that you just hit to become marked. Now, marked is a condition in 4th edition that gives you a penalty to attack anyone who didn't mark you. But here's the difference. The person that the bard chose for this person to be marked by was the fighter over here, who that person didn't know existed. So what ends up happening is this monster now has a penalty to attack the bard because he is being distracted by a fighter that he neither can see nor knows exists. Now, we could argue and debate what really happened here, but the thing is clear. In 4th edition, this shit just works, and you just go, yeah, okay, that works. All right. And if you want to make the fiction make sense to it, you can definitely do that. You can be like, oh, well, it's a psychic thing. It's a bard thing. He's hallucinating. You could make up whatever kind of crazy bullshit that you want to do. And that's fine. In fact, more power to you. It's probably more fun. You don't need to. You're not required to. It just works. You don't have to describe it in the fiction. You could just go, that's just the way things work. I'll give you another example, which I think you've heard Smith bitch about in this game. So basically, if you did an AoE, like a fireball or a thing, you, the character, being blind, didn't give you a mischance, right? And I think we can all understand that, right? Like if we're attacking with like a ranged spell or a bow and we're blind, then we would have a mischance. But if we're just throwing a fireball, then it wouldn't make sense that we would have a mischance. But remember, in 4th edition, AoEs included many things, including martial AoEs, like where you're basically taking a sword and spinning in a circle and hitting everybody that's adjacent to you. There was an instance once where we had like a PC here and a PC there and like a PC here and like a PC there. Or no, maybe it was like, and a PC like here. And there was a blind drow swordsman, okay, who was like over here. And even though he was blind, he basically he went like, dude, completely avoided all attacks of opportunity because the game rules don't care if you're blind or not. It doesn't affect what squares you can. It does make you move at half speed. So the drow's normal speed of 12 squares or 10 squares was reduced to 5 squares or something. I'm exaggerating here on this chart here, but so when you're blind, you get, and then the drow that had a power, which was called blade arc, that let him make an AoE blade attack, but there's no mischance because it's an AoE and AoEs don't have a mischance in 4th edition. So this is an example of where the mechanics take precedence. Now, we could explain why the swinging your sword around in a circle isn't affected by the fact of you being blind. And the joke, by the way, you may have heard this before. Smith will sometimes, when I say someone's blind or something, Smith will say, "I believe you mean visually impaired," because our joke, like the way that my players made it make sense, and again, they were just kind of, like, what the fuck is even happening? Like, what are we even doing here? They were like, okay, blind isn't blind. Blind is just visually impaired. Like, you must be able to see. It's just you can't see very well or something, because they were like, that was the only way it made possible sense to them. But 4th edition doesn't ask you to make this make sense, and it doesn't need you to make it make sense. It just the mechanics work. If you want to explain it in the fiction, you can. You don't have to, but you can. It is different in a fiction first game. In a fiction first game, you have to be able to do it in order to do it. And the best example of this is, and the rules of PbtA are very strict about this. If you're a water bender and there's no water around, you can't use your cool water powers, because that's not how water bending works in the fiction. You're like, yeah, but I did the move and I have this technique. No, it doesn't matter. You need water to bend and you don't have it. And of course, it comes down to the expectations of what the players are expecting. Because I'll be honest with you, if you were playing a 4th edition game and the GM started making kind of like fiction-based rulings, it could create some bad feelings at the table. It could create some tension. It could create some wonkiness in the gameplay, So that's kind of what I mean by fiction first. Let me see here. I wanted to catch up here. Vin says GM moves not happening in combat is my favorite thing about this system so far. Yeah, Jackal, that's true. And I should also point out that the game is very clear. Combat exchanges are only for when the players are going up against like truly notable opponents. If you're going against just random, guards outside of if there's a couple of no-name guards standing outside of the prison cell and you're going to go break out your buddy, you could just be like, I make a single earthbending, use my skills, and it's just like, 2 big pillars of rock, just knock them in the head or eject them and send them flying through the air. They crash into a cart. My cabbages, right? We don't have to go into a combat for that. We can just deal with that right outside of combat. Let's see here. In Girls by Moonlight, there's an obligation phase where your PC gets worn down by society and takes stress. We quickly house ruled that the stress roll should be made before the scene. Then we made the scene reflect how much stress they took. I mean, I suppose another way to think, what you're basically doing is you're putting the mechanics first, and then you're filling in the gaps with the fiction. And so it's very similar, Kalana. Let's be real. I don't think this is true at all, Vin. Let's be real. For most people, the fiction win. It's pretty clear why. Mechanics are often imperfect, and almost every system needs a little hand waving to make sense. I think you're actually wrong. In modern day sensibilities, I actually think you're wrong. I think a lot of people have a problem with this. And I think a lot of those people, a lot of those people are the grumpy, misguided people from 5th edition who are like, mad that the mechanics are bad. And it's like, well, that shouldn't matter, right? Because you could just change the fiction and stuff like that. Same thing with Pathfinder 2nd edition. And you see people talking about how their GM made a call, and you'll see people like on Reddit attack somebody for that because they're like, oh, hey, listen, the mechanics are important. It's a game. It's a game. So I don't actually think that's true. I think that's true for people who don't like RPGs, the character builder game, right? For people who just want to sit down and they want to, have a fun little story time, I think that might be true. But for people who approach RPGs from a much more gamist point of view, much more video gamist point of view, my build, and I thinking about this, and I took this, and I took this. I think that can create a lot of friction at a table. London says, every time we talk about these exchanges in the system, I think, yeah, this is good stuff. Now, again, for me, the aha moment was when at Gen Con, when Mark Diaz-Truin talked about how when you go into an exchange, let's see here. I don't know if it's basic. I don't know if it's going to tell me exactly where that is. But anyways, I found it before, but I couldn't find out because I was like shocked. But basically, inside of this combat exchange, the other we can't think of that as like, in my mind, when we were doing the combat exchange, we were still playing the conversation. Right? In my mind, when we were doing the combat exchange, when we were doing this part of the game, it was just like any other thing of PbtA, where, and sure, the players were making this stance move, okay, which is a little bit unusual because it doesn't trigger a GM move. But in my mind, we were taking every single one of these stance moves and we were connecting it to the fiction and we were pushing the fiction forward and we were doing all this other stuff. And I was, even thinking about it in terms of maybe basic moves and stuff could be available and trigger. Maybe somebody's pleading. Maybe somebody's shifting someone's balance. But they said no. Those basic moves, those balance moves, are shut off during the combat exchange because the combat exchange is just a big move. Sure, it's got some sub processes. What does Pathfinder Second Edition call them? What is process? What do they call them? Derived actions or something like that, right? Like our activities with sub actions, right? This is one big move. It's just like a big group move. And this frees you up to approach it as just, let's quickly get through the mechanics. Okay. Figure out who took stress, whose balance shifted, because the consequences of a combat are your balance shifts, you take conditions, you take stress. That's it. That's the only thing that can happen to you inside of a combat exchange. Or you can get a status. I'm sorry, actually, that's not true. You can gain a status, you can gain conditions, you can gain you can spend fatigue, or you can shift your balance. So from a character sheet standpoint, you can either have your balance shifted, you can mark a condition or two, you could mark some fatigue over here, or you could end up marking a status or two, either positive or negative. These are all mechanical things, but the key is we do them quickly, boom, 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 and then when we get to the end, we make it make all sense. And then we describe this cool montage scene, and we're all kind of playing off each other because everybody at the table should be seeing what's happening. We all get the benefit of sort of like hindsight of saying like, okay, we know what happens. Now, let's, as a little group, tell a story. Because, it might even allow for players to stop in and, take narrative control of the NPC for a moment, right? Like, the PC knows that Azula is going to blast him with fire. So the PC takes it upon himself. And when he's describing his attack with his earth blast, and he's like, and then at the last moment, I'm about to blast it with the earth. And that's when she comes in with the mega flare and like it melts my rock and just molten, earth sprays back in my face. And I go falling back screaming. And it's like, and I'm sure I'm a little shook, but I'm mostly afraid at that kind of power being generated from one bender. Right. And so we're telling stories about our characters and their feelings about what's happening in the combat, but we're all benefiting from the fact that we already know what happens. And now we can go back and sort of tell the story of what happens. Sarek says, this is not how I understand the Avatar combat system at all. Oops. D20 Neanderthal trying. I got it wrong too, Sarek. I got it wrong too. Again, it was at Gen Con when Mark Diaz Truman, and they said, and even by the way, one of the people there, they had their like GM squad there, and one of the GM squad was talking about like pleading or something during combat, and that's actually how it came up because the other GMs were like, actually, you can't do any moves in combat. Like inside of a combat exchange, there is no basic moves, there is no balance moves. Those happen in the conversation. And we're not having a conversation right now. We're doing a combat exchange. At all as possibly stretched, I was trying to narrate on each combat move. I mean, I'm not saying that it needs to be absolutely, brutally, strictly 100% mechanical. I think inevitably you're going to give some context as to what your character is doing, so that way people can at least have some sort of rough idea. But in terms of like figuring out what the net is, it's a lot. And by the way, this starts to make a lot more sense, Sarek, because I had a problem with this because I was thinking about my character could get taken out during the early part of the combat round, but I still get to go because everything's happening simultaneously. And so if earlier in the combat round, when my character is marking fatigue and I mark, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's my 5th fatigue, I guess my character is unconscious. Then it's like, well, then how am I attacking? Isn't this not respecting the fiction? I guess I don't get to attack, but the game rule says I can because it says it's simultaneous. It didn't make any sense to me. How could something be fiction first, but also like my character's unconscious, but I'm not unconscious? It didn't make any sense. And understanding that the basic rules of the game kind of stop for a moment and we kind of go through everybody's actions and then we tell the story, I think was very illuminating to that. George says, Derek, I feel the gameplay focus of the system is what frames what fiction the game cares about. George, I think I agree with you. I'm not 100% sure I quite understand that, but the gameplay focus of the system is what frames what the fiction the game cares about. The problem is, like, the gameplay of, the gameplay of D&D or Pathfinder, like, is what's the gameplay focus of that? And is that what the fiction cares about? I don't necessarily know that I agree with that. We had a $5 super chat from Self-Confessed Cynic. As we were both well aware, no one actually plays Pathfinder 2nd Edition. That's what I meant. Not that they even know this. Raw rules are unplayable. I disagree. There are plenty of people out there who are playing raw Pathfinder 2nd. I disagree with that. There are definitely people. Go to a Pathfinder Society game. You will see a bunch of people playing Pathfinder Society raw. D&D the character builder game edition, actual gameplay not required. Absolutely. Yeah, trying to have the conversation while we're in the middle of combat. Again, that's just what I'm used to, right? And that's what I'm used to in D&D games. It's what I'm used to because, right, in D&D, think about it this way. The idea is that it's a 6-second combat round, right? Think about this. In D&D Pathfinder, we have a 6-second combat round. Okay. And when you describe your character's actions, it's going to be pretty tough that you could even fit them into 6 actions, but clearly you're getting your 6 seconds worth, right? But so if there's 7 people in a combat round, then 42 seconds of actions are happening, but the whole thing happens in 6 seconds. But in D&D, if I go first, I take you out. You don't get to go. You're unconscious. But yet those actions were supposed to be simultaneous. So it doesn't really make any sense if you really think about it, like what is happening? We're all going at the same time. That character has a bow. We're all operating inside the same 6 seconds. Their action, had they survived, was going to be shoot from a long distance. And on my turn, I just happened to go first in this initiative, even though we're all going at the same time, but I went first, even though it's simultaneous because we're all operating in the same 6 seconds. I stride 30 feet, then I sudden charge another 60 feet, and then finally, after running 90 feet, I attack this guy with the bow. And so you're like, okay, but what was the bow guy doing that whole time that my character was charging 90 feet across the battlefield to hit him in the face with a sword? Well, he had to have been attacking because our combat round is only 6 seconds long, so it's not like I can wait. If I waited 6 seconds for my 6 seconds, now the combat round is 12 seconds. So it doesn't make any sense. Right. In trying to create the game, they've actually made the game, not make any sense. I clicked the wrong one. There we go. Jackal says PBX, baby. Yeah, PBX, Path Builder Extreme. That's just raw Path Builder. Full out. That just makes my soul hurt. Well, this is the problem that I have when I play Pathfinder 2nd Edition. It's difficult for me to play. It's just for me difficult to play that game in a way in which I just kind of ignore the rules and pretend like they don't matter. On a similar note to the combat exchange instead of separate moves, recently I kind of lamented how few RPGs actually have any viable and well-described rules for simple combat for quick encounters. Yeah, I mean, Forged in the Dark, in my personal opinion, does it really well. And by the way, we'll go back. I don't know why I left. We'll go back to Avatar really quick. Okay. Let's say you want to have a simple combat really quickly. We're not going to go into a combat exchange. I mean, these guys are cool, but it's not combat exchange worthy. One of the benders in your group or one of the martial artists come in and they go, I'm just going to ninja flip in, and I'm a martial artist. I'm going to ninja flip in, and I'm going to start boom, 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 just taking these guys out, and I'm just going to quickly, wipe the floor with them. And, I'm going to look all sweet and badass in martial arts and lots of, cuts and jabs and kicks and spinning things. Maybe I'll pull out my whip and, like one guy goes to grab his, his electric baton thing, and I grab it with my whip and flip it from him. Okay, sounds like you're relying on your skills and training to overcome an obstacle. The obstacle being this gang of mooks. All right, roll with focus. And our single PC rolls with focus. And they get a total of a 7. Okay, so they'll do it, and they'll do it imperfectly. The GM tells you approach might lead to unexpected consequences. Accept those consequences or mark 1 fatigue. So our player just says, okay, I have to struggle a little bit more. The guy I whip, we're struggling back and forth for a little bit. And then finally, like at the last minute, I flip him over my shoulder, throw him down, and he bangs into the wall, cartoon guy style, flies into it upside down, slides down, whoa, with little, spinning birds around his head. Cool. That was me marking a fatigue to ignore those consequences. Boom, the guys are all taken out. But alternatively, maybe my character rolled really badly. I rolled a 5, a total of 5. So I got a miss. That means that like the GM gets to make a move, which means I get to decide what happens. But this is where the other players can come in and say, I'm going to help. When you take appropriate action to help a companion, mark 1 fatigue to give them a +1 to their roll after the roll. Note, this is also a good indication. You cannot help in a combat exchange this way, but we're not in a combat exchange. So our martial artist, cool PC goes in and he's kicking ass. He rolls balls. He rolls 5. One of the other PCs goes, is an earthbender, and he's like, he sees that his buddy's in trouble. So, he describes how he, as his buddy's flipping in, he, strides forward, throws his fists up, and, 2 columns of earth come up and, grab 2 of the guys, and then bash them together, and they fall unconscious. As the waterbender describes how, they quickly throw their hand out to the nearby fountain, and a water whip strikes across and smacks that one guy that he was struggling with in the face. They each mark 2 fatigue. They each give him a +1. Now he has a 7. Now he can mark 1 fatigue and accept no consequences. So the overall effect was the group had to mark 3 fatigue, but it became a team fight. Everybody got their cool little moment, but we didn't even go into the combat exchange system. We just did rely on your skills and training with 2 applications of the help move. And more important than that, it generated 1 die roll. And I should also point out that this is sort of some new Magpie tech, because Magpie tech greatly increases the narrative meta currency power of the PC. Because in a normal PbtA game, there is no meta currency. If you rolled a 7, 8, or 9, you did it imperfectly. And you did it, but there's going to be unexpected consequences. Full stop. If you read any old PbtA game, especially ones that were like less heroic, you would see this language. What you wouldn't see is the language after the fact. Accept those consequences or mark 1 fatigue. So this gives players, on their character sheet, this fatigue track, which is really kind of a form of narrative metacurrency. Because now when they're doing something that they are skilled at, that relies on their skills and training, they can just cash in a fatigue and ignore the partial consequences. And that's, yes, the cost is that they gain fatigue. I mean, yes, that is true. But either way, they are getting to decide what that is. And by the way, that comes after the GM tells you. Okay? So the GM, it's not like you roll a 7, 8, or 9, and then the GM says, do you take a fatigue or do you take the consequence? No. The GM tells you what the consequences would be, and then you get to make a decision about whether you would rather have those consequences or mark a fatigue. So obviously, if the GM says, the consequences are you're going to take 3 fatigue, you might say, well, I'll take 1 fatigue instead. But there could be other consequences, like maybe your fatigue's running out, and the GM says, okay, you knock them out, but not before one of the guard throws his hand onto the nearby, emergency button, and klaxons start, rampaging throughout the compound. That's the unexpected consequence. Now the player has to make a choice. Do I spend a fatigue to negate that consequence, or am I okay with that? And do I want to save my fatigue, or do I need my fatigue for other things? So again, it's just putting a lot more power into the PC's hands. I should point out that this game also uses root, does the same thing, because there's another move. So normally in PbtA games, you have one move. It's called Act Under Fire in Apocalypse World. And basically, it's the go-to move. In Dungeon World, it's called Defy Danger. And it's basically something bad happens and make a roll move. And it's the same no matter what the situation is. What Magpie did is they kind of took the Defy Danger rule and they split it up into two different roles. One is when you do something that you're good at, and the other is when you do something that you are just not skilled at all. And it gives us two different moves to handle somebody doing something, in a crazy, risky situation. But you're either relying on your skills and training, and notice, let's look at this. When you rely on your skills and training, on a hit, you do it. On a 7 through 9, you do it imperfectly. You might take consequences, or you can mark a fatigue to ignore that consequences. You're doing something in your wheelhouse, so you get more control over it. You can control the consequences. But when you're pressing your luck, say what you do and roll with passion. On a hit, you do it, but it costs you to scrape by. The GM tells you what it costs you. Notice, there's no way to avoid this, right? When you're pushing your luck, you don't have as much control over the outcomes, right? And you notice that no matter what you do, there will be some sort of consequence, okay? On a hit, you do it, but it costs you to scrape by. So in both these instances, you get to do something. The move is changing depending on whether it's something that you're skilled at or if it's something that you're basically just YOLOing, right? Push your luck versus rely on your skills and talents is basically position and effect. Yes, George. I would say it is more just like position, actually, than effect, because relying on your skills and training is kind of like being in a controlled position, right? And if you generate negative consequences, they won't be that bad, or you'll get to make a choice, right? A lot of times I think if you're in a controlled position, it's like, either give up or press on at a riskier situation or something like that, right? You get a little bit more controlled. Doing something where you're pushing your luck is more like a risky move, or even potentially a desperate move, depending on how one you want to look at it. But yes, I don't necessarily know effect, because effect in this game isn't really quantified as much as it is in Blades in the Dark, but it's definitely like position. London's apparently 100% going to run it mid-year. Run what, London? Avatar? George C. Can the GM reject the PC's claim to help in that example? George, no, but yes. And I say no because in order for a PC to help, all of these moves, remember, you cannot help. That's a move. Believe it or not, in Pyro the Apocalypse games, you can't move. You can't do moves. The player has to describe, because we're not in a combat exchange, we're in the normal conversation. The player has to describe what they're doing in the conversation. And if this move triggers when you take appropriate action to help a companion, then they get the benefit of this move. It would be the only debate in terms of a GM rejecting it would be if they don't believe, if there's a disagreement between whether or not the action that you're describing you taking is going to help your companion or not. So that's, it would probably be pretty bold of a player to be like, all right, I'm not on the scene. My character's a firebender, but I get a sense that they need my help. So I launch a Hadouken into the air, and it's going to streak over the city and land right on that dude. I help for +1 fatigue. Again, this is, you're reaching, right? I think a lot of people, I think you would feel it and go, okay, this doesn't make any sense. You're not really help. You're not here. You can't help in the fiction. So how are you going to help these people? These mechanics are there to really help alleviate the group check issue with PbtA systems. 100%, George. 100%. Root and Avatar both have the same help move. And I should point out that previous PbtA games, the help move was a move itself. that you rolled 2d6 with and could have a 6-. It was terrible. This is way better. And George, this is exactly how PbtA does group moves. You increase the cost by having multiple people have to spend fatigue, but you can get a better result as a group. And you describe in the fiction how you're helping each other out. So yeah, definitely. Now it's interesting because this is kind of a separate side note, but so one thing that I have been really interested in is Legend of the Five Rings. And in Legend of the Five Rings, the idea, and by the way, I also talk on this channel about Fate Accelerated Edition. And in Fate Accelerated Edition, along with Legend of the Five Rings, you have this idea of approaches. Right? And it's not about what you're doing so much as how you are doing it. Right? So in Legend of the Five Rings, if you're doing something with passion, with creativity, with fervor, with intensity, then you are using that is in the fiction. Then you are doing a fire-based approach. If you're doing something with calm and collecting, and you're taking your time and you're thinking logically and rationally, then you're using an earth-based approach. And that determines mechanically what dice you roll, and each of these different approaches has different mechanical benefits and mechanical consequences. Now, Fate Accelerated Edition does the same thing. Fate Accelerated Edition is a simple version of Fate where your character has a series of approaches. In most Fate games, your characters have a list of skills, drive, guns, battle, all right? And they have a bonus that you roll when you roll your, Fate dice. But in Fate Accelerated Edition, you just have some basic approaches. You could do something strong, quick. I don't remember what the con one is, but they're basically strength con, dex win con. You could do something with smarts, right? You could do something with, I'm trying to remember what the Fate Accelerated Edition. Anybody randomly just happen to know all of the Fate Accelerated Edition approaches? Fate Accelerated. Clever. Oh, here we go. Careful. That's one. That might be clever. Carefully, quickly, forcefully. Anyways. We get the point. Now, the point here that is cool, and you kind of see this, right, in DC-20, kind of, with the prime attribute. But the idea is that when a character in Fate Accelerated Edition, flashy, when a character in Fate Accelerated Edition goes to do something like enter into melee, okay, and they're going to go fight somebody, well, you could do that forcefully, you could do that quickly, you could do that cleverly, you could do that flashy, right? You could do it carefully, you could do it sneakily, right? So the approach is describing how your character does it in the fiction. Now, the reason why I love this in Legend of the Five Rings is because, and so in theory, of course, in Fate Accelerated Edition, if our character had a +3 forcefully and a 0 quick and a -1 clever and a 0 careful and a +1 flashy, you could clearly see that there would be an incentive for me to just hammer this one as often as I can. Now, look, I get it. People role play and I get that they make bad suboptimal decisions. But I also think that the game is better when a player doesn't have to operate against their own best interest in order to make the game make, some sort of sense. Because I'm not saying that there wouldn't be a situation where you wouldn't be doing something forcefully. We're sneaking into the compound. How am I doing that forcefully? It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. But what I like about Legend of the Five Rings is just like you did here in Legend of the Five Rings, you have your different rings, and you might have some that are good and some that are not so good. And you might say, okay, so why don't we just use hammer, or why don't we just hammer fire every time? Well, the reason is because Legend of the Five Rings also has DCs, although they call them TNs. And in this game, which approach you use can modify the DC up or down if it's the quote right approach. And this is true for actions, physical actions, but it's also true for interacting with other NPCs. Additionally, each of these different approaches can generate different opportunities. For example, with the earth, if you do something with an earth-based approach, you might generate the ability to heal yourself or your allies. You can't get heal if you choose a fire-based approach. So even though fire might be the best numerical value for you, in this instance, because you think that this character hates hotheads, this NPC that you're dealing with, he hates passionate people. He hates, he's a Shinseist monk. He doesn't, he's not moved by stirring bouts of passion. And so the base DC to convince him is 3, but you suspect that if you try to use a fire-based approach, it's going to increase the DC by 2 to 5. And I don't want to get into the mechanics of this game, but that basically makes this impossible, even with your fire-based approach. But he will listen to the wisdom of the void. And if you use a void-based approach, the TN might drop to 1. And so by choosing the void approach, you actually give yourself a better chance of succeeding than you would have if you had, quote, used your best stat or your best approach. Additionally, you might choose one of these other approaches because you think you want the benefit from that. All right, what is this the point of? Only that in PbtA, I like the idea of swapping the idea of a move around. And imagine if we were making a PbtA game based using the Legend of the Five Rings. Now, normally when you think about a PbtA character sheet, right, it has it has the you have your stats. And this is just something I've been thinking about. I mean, we're just hanging out here. You've got these stats: creativity, focus, harmony, passion. And so the default assumption when we think about these games, I think, I could be wrong, but the default assumption is that if you were to do a PbtA Legend of the Five Rings game, right, your stats would be air, earth, fire, water, right? That's like the default assumption. What I'm actually suggesting is that we don't do that. What I'm suggesting is that we make 5 different moves. Okay? And so it'll say something like, when you do something, right, with passion or creativity or fervor, roll, blah, blah, blah. And here is how this move plays out. This would be the fire move. So this is basically the same idea of, like, in Avatar and in Root, we had like your skilled move, and then we had you're relying on your luck move, right? So we had these 2 different moves. They each have different mechanical outcomes and different effects. And what you do and how you do it matters. So what I'm suggesting is that we actually make it so that the moves themselves, okay, are the fire, the earth, the air, the water, and they each have their own list of different effects and bonuses and consequences. And it's sort of like an approach-based designed to PbtA. And I thought about that. I was reading something about a blog about Brindlewood Bay or something, and about like the day move and the night move. And I was like, that it's the idea of that different circumstances can lead to different moves, even if you're doing the same thing. And so I thought about the idea of like, could we have a situation in PbtA where the move became more generic, and instead of the move being what you're doing, it's how you're doing it instead. And I don't know. I think there's kind of PbtA L5R. I don't know if that's exactly how it would work out, but I think there's something interesting there because I love the approach-based design to these RPGs, because I'm super interested in understanding why your character is doing something, how they're doing something. I think that's, to me, a lot more interesting than can they do it, which is kind of more traditional, like what's your stat, roll your stat. Because just by choosing an approach, you're sort of storytelling, you're sort of role playing, you're adding to the story, because now I get to understand what your character is doing in the fiction. When you play D&D and your character attacks, you are attacking with strength, right? Now you could describe it however you want, and the game doesn't care. You could describe it as your character very patiently waiting for the person to tire himself out, doing a series of, feints and ripostes and parries and dodges as the sweat begins to bead, and then waiting for the perfect moment you make one quick surgical strike. You could describe that all you want. You're attacking with strength. Unless you have some feat or some sort of class ability, right? And somebody goes, well, that sounds like the investigator. Are you an investigator? It's like, well, no. And it's like, I'm just describing it. And you're like, okay, it's fine. But it's FBT, because you're still going to roll a strength. And you're like, and it's like, well, is your character really smart? No, my character has an 8 intelligence, but he has a 20 strength. So rolling with a +5, even though I just described it as my character being, trying to do, battle this person very cleverly. So for me, I like the approach because it just generates immediate in-game fiction. But I also like that. I like the limited set. There's only like 5 ways that you can do things. There's only like 6 ways that you can do things. And we have to sometimes map, whatever it is that we're doing to one of those moves. But, and maybe there's sometimes a little bit of a stretch there. But I mean, like, I think that that's interesting to me because not only does it give a mechanical effect to make those different approaches differently, it also means that the way that you describe how you're doing something affects the mechanics of the game. And I really, really like that. That's correct, George. Being, yes, action, what your action rating isn't necessarily a reflection of how good you are at that thing, right? Because moves are very fiction based. So yes, it's actually the chance to avoid bad consequences rather than being good at it per se. As an example, whether you are in Blades in the Dark, whether you are in a desperate position, risky position, or a controlled position, doesn't matter. It does not matter if you're desperate. I'm hanging off the edge of I'm hanging off the edge of a balcony, dangling over with one hand, dangling over the city's below me. The lightning rail is the lightning fence is crackling. I'm dangling there, and my arch enemy is there, and I go to shoot him. Well, that's a desperate position, so we're going to roll desperate. Versus, my character is in a perfect sniper's position. I'm completely camouflaged. I've been staking this place out for days. I've got this person's schedule down pat. I've got my long range smoothbore rifle. I'm waiting for that perfect moment. It's perfectly, there's no clouds in this. I can see perfectly, and the person walks out, and I now get to shoot him. Controlled, right? In both those situations, if I roll a 6, all of the rules text is the same, which is you succeed, you do it. So whether my character is dangling from a roof or whether my character is in an elevated sniper's nest, the result of shooting somebody on a 6 is the same. Now, the effect might be different, but from a position perspective, position doesn't actually care about affecting your ability to succeed. It only affects if you fail, Now, it doesn't increase the chance of failure. It doesn't decrease the chance of failure. It just says, if you do fail, how bad is that failure? It's a very, very weird way of thinking about it. Because a lot of people like to go, oh, position is DC. It is not. DCs are actually the complete opposite of position. Because position doesn't change the likelihood of success. Whereas DCs change the likelihood of success. But DCs, when they go up or down, don't change the outcome of failure or, of how bad it is. If you failed the DC, whether the DC was 20 or the DC was 16, the effect is the same. You failed. But in Blaze in the Dark, it does matter. So it's actually literally almost the complete inverse of DC. And so a lot of people approach it like DC, and I say that is not the way to approach it. Because it's a weird thing to think about. Oh, something's harder, so it should be, harder, less likely to occur. No, that's not how Blaze in the Dark works at all. You can't actually, yeah, exactly. The DCs are baked. You can't change them. George is absolutely right. The only way that you could affect the DC would essentially be having more or less dice. And to my knowledge, there is no way for the GM to penalize an action dice pool in Blaze in the Dark to represent something being difficult. So that is a completely the case, that you don't get to decide the DCs. The how difficult something is in terms of your likelihood to succeed is not a question that you ever have to ask in Blaze in the Dark. Instead, you just want to ask yourself, if this went bad, how bad would it be? So you're not deciding the DC, you're deciding the effects of failure. Another way to think of it is, in Blaze in the Dark, you're playing D&D 5th edition. Everything is DC 11. Everything is DC 11. Boothby's here on vacation, stopping in a pub and say hi, right before we're about to drop off too. So that's pretty good. Welcome, Boothby. Hello. Hope you're having fun. Glad you got at least one RPG down. More to go. So in D&D 5th edition, if you're playing Blaze in the Dark, everything is DC 11 forever. But the only thing that changes is if somebody does fail the roll, what happens? You failed the athletics roll to open up the door. It takes you a little bit longer, but you eventually get it down. Or you fail the athletics roll and you strain yourself and you take a bunch of damage, or you lose a bunch of hit dice. Or you fail to open up the door and it gets smashed in by a giant as you're trying ineffectively to wail into it, and you get crushed and you're almost killed. I don't know. My point is you are affecting what happens, not how hard it is. Thus, if something is easier, thus higher chance of success, you just don't roll. I mean, that is true, Mateo. I mean, there are sort of the bookends, which is if something is so unlikely. I mean, essentially in D&D, right? I think I've made this chart before, but in D&D we have, I definitely done this chart before, so I'm not going to super focus on it. But in D&D we have, why can't I find? Oh, because I'm not on that right screen. In D&D we have this. Right, percent chance, and it is a stepwise function that goes up like this, and it goes up in 5% increments, right? Because and this is 0%, this is 0%, and this is 100%. And that's what we think of when we think of D&D. There's that kind of incrementation. In Blaze in the Dark or Powered by the Apocalypse, it's almost like you have a 0% chance of succeeding when it's really impossible. And then when it's pretty much a given, you have a 100% chance of succeeding. And then in between is this make a dice roll. There is no gradation. It's either no chance, 100% chance, or make the single dice roll based off of your action pool. Anand says it Anon said it beautifully. The only DCs in Blades in the Dark are possible and impossible. And well, no, I would say it's automatic, impossible, possible. Those are the 3 DCs. So you have impossible down here, you have 100 automatic up here, and then you have maybe in the middle. You have not PbtA'd or FITD'd. Boothby, I can't wait to hear the stories, buddy. I cannot wait to hear the stories. So yeah, again, we were just kind of shooting the shit tonight. Anybody have any fun stories or interesting questions or topics or something? Anybody want to someone's been burning something in your craw? In a board game today, my friend was rolling 4 dice and summing them. He had to total to 4 or higher to win the challenge. We had to discuss whether there was even a point to roll. I mean, at that point, I would just roll. What's your opinion on facing? My problem with facing, I will say this. Facing existed in the original D&D, and I think it was silly because the combat rounds were 1 minute long. Facing makes a lot more sense in the modern RPG because your combat round is only 6 seconds long. And so it becomes much more reasonable that your character actually would have a facing in that short of period of time. Now, that being said, it still suffers from the problem that these actions are supposed to be simultaneous, and my character is just standing straight ahead while people move around behind me, and my character, I'm not even surrounded by anybody else. I'm just surrounded by one person, and they move behind me, and my character is just standing forward. That I think there's a certain element where it's just like, yeah, facing is the direction you're looking in. Yeah, Pepper. So actually, okay, fair enough. So, like to give an example, in old school D&D, okay, here is our PC, right? And they are facing that way, right? So like their miniature is facing that way. But what that means is that this square and this square are flanking, right? Even if there's just one enemy, right? If you had one enemy come in and stand here, that enemy is flanking you. Or if they're here, they're actually in your rear, which gave you an even bigger bonus. So I think the problem comes out now. I did see Jackal say that facing works great in Hackmaster, and it does because in Hackmaster everybody takes their turn simultaneously. I think it's a problem that it's already difficult for me personally. I don't know if it's difficult for you all, but it's already difficult for me personally when we're playing D&D and, my fighter is right here and, my wizard buddy is right here. And then the monster, just goes and then readies to attack. So they walk over there and then they're apparently waiting. And then and then they both just destroy my wizard buddy. And my fighter is just sitting there going like, I can't stand it. Now, GM Scott brings up intercept, and I love the intercept rules. One of my favorite rules from 13th Age. Of all the things that 13th Age did, I love the intercept rule the most, and rightfully so, because the miniature combat game Mordheim, released in 1999, did the same thing. And for those of you who aren't aware of what this works is, it's basically in 13th Age, I'm going to get rid of this guy here. In 13th Age, your character essentially has an automatic free, every character has essentially an automatic free reaction, which is that like, if this monster is going to get to my wizard, right? And the GM starts to describe it, and it's kind of a loose theater of the mind. Like we might be using miniatures, but they might not necessarily be on a grid. It's a little bit more loosey goosey. But the idea is that I'm like, okay, this monster starts charging for the wizard, and the fighter goes, well, I'm going to, grit my teeth, heft my two-handed weapon, and I'm going to like charge in and meet him. And what you would end up doing is actually moving your fighter, kind of like in his path, and then the monster hits you. And in 13th Age, this is called being intercepted. And now these characters are, I think the term is, it might be engaged, but like you can't just leave a fight. You actually have to pop free. It is called. You have to pop free of the engagement. So, and essentially, that monster has been sort of locked up by that monster. Now, of course, this is why being outnumbered is problematic because, and obviously rightfully so, this monster is free to charge forward. That being said, when I played 13th Age, it was often the case when I had monsters, especially if they were like lower monsters, minion type monsters, right? So if this is our fighter, I'll use a different color so that, you know, we make it a little bit more sensible. Come on, there we go. So here's our fighter in blue. What I would do in, I guess that's what our fighter looks like now. So what I would do in 13th Age a lot of times is I would just describe like, okay, these monsters, these orcs, you know, maybe there's, I don't know, maybe there's, you know, 4 of them, 5 of them or something like that. And like, they're just one big group. And so I describe them starting to charge into the wizard and the fighter says, no way, I'm engaging them. And I might kind of look at again, there's a lot of dice, a lot of GM hodgy-podgy. I might say, okay, the fighter rushes in. These guys all come in. Okay, these 4, you know, the fighter kind of locks up. There's 5 of them. One of them gets by to the wizard. All right, so fighter, you are now engaged with 4 of them. They're going to be attacking you. You're going to be fighting against them. Wizard, 1 did get breaking. The fighter can't possibly get all of them, right? And it also might depend on how I just randomly have how I've described, if I'm using pure theater of the mind. But if I describe the orcs as being like, they're in some sort of, or maybe they're not orcs now, maybe they're like some sort of soldiers in some sort of wide line formation, and they're doing like a pincer maneuver in on the wizard, you know, I might say, oh, well, you can only get to 3 of them because the other 2 go wide around the flanks because, you know, the tactical position mattered or something like that. So I love the intercept rule. It's like my favorite rule of all time. And it actually makes the fights feel way more dynamic and way cooler. Yes, it's a tactical grid of the mind. Has anybody here played Beacon? K2, I have not played Beacon. I think we have some people playing Beacon. I think we have some people playing or have been playing on the Knights of Last Call Discord, but I don't know. But obviously Beacon is, you know, tactical JRPG kind of inspired a game. Anyways. Awesome. Well, thanks everybody. It's 11 o'clock. I got work tomorrow, unfortunately. But it should be a fairly easy week, I think. Not sure what we're going to be doing for streams. I think we'll probably do another campaign stream on Thursday. So we'll get a vote out to the patrons to see which campaign setting we want to talk about next. Will it be, we already did Eberron, we did Birthright. Will it be Dragonlance? Or will it be the Forgotten Realms? Or will it be a Dark Sun? Or will it be, anyway, my point, if we could do this for a while. We'll see what they want. Mebaman says Tolos. You know, I actually never owned Tolos, City by the Spire. I did not, sorry. I like Monty Cook, but anything but Forgotten Realms, no, this is such a misunderstanding of how good the Forgotten Realms are. You know, listen, let me say something here, Mateo. A lot of people hate on 5th edition, and well, 5th edition wasn't exactly my thing. I think the game is fine, and I'm actually kind of almost a little excited to try out this revised edition because I never really played the 2010 versions or 2014 versions, so I didn't care. But there is one thing that I cannot forgive 5th edition for, and that's for convincing people that the Forgotten Realms sucks. Now, don't get me wrong, 4th edition didn't help because 4th edition kind of shit the bed. I love Forgotten Realms, but this might be like one of the worst books of all time because, and again, it's partially green. That's why it's partially see-through because of my chroma key. But what they did in 4th edition is this thing called the Spell Plague, and it's absolutely horrible and it's terrible. Here's why I'm mad, though, okay? Because at the end of the day, you know, this is the 4th edition Forgotten Realms campaign guide, and it's a big book, and it's got all sorts of stuff here. It's a Welcome to the Realms of Faerun. This book here is fucking, this book is so fucking gold standard, you wouldn't even believe it, okay? But here's my problem. As far as I know, I could be wrong, but please correct me. They're like, oh, Forgotten Realms is a standard book, and they came out with one book, as far as I know, and it is called the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide. Forgotten Realms is not just the Sword fucking Coast. Okay? I get it. Baldur's Gate, Waterdeep, the only two were, the ones that had a board game and a video game after it. And that's what everybody fucking knows. But it's given people this just horrible misunderstanding of how cool the Forgotten Realms are and the different types of cultures and stories. And there's just like, there's a lot. There's a lot of stuff going on there. And they just swept that shit under the rug for 5th edition. So, and now to be clear, that is not as bad as the Spell Plague. I will say that the Spell Plague was absolutely horrible. But yeah. Anyways. Oh yeah. See, and here's the thing. GM Scott says the Dale, Thay, Mithranor, Am, Kalishan, Tethir, Sembia, the Vilhound Reach, the Moon Sea, Aglaron, Rashaman, the Vast. I mean, the Great Dale, which is different from the Dale lands. Halrua. The Savage North. Anarok. Cormyr. I mean, the list goes on and on, people. And they're all they're so cool. They're different. And the thing is and I might say this is to its credit. Well, let me rephrase it. I think it's great. The thing about it is, this isn't like Golarion. See, in Golarion, it's like, and here's the undead world, and here's the devil world, or devil country, and here's the whatever country, and here's like, and every country or every nation or every geographical space in Golarion is kind of its own little demi-plane. Okay, the thing about Forgotten Realms is, and again, some people might say this is not to its credit, okay, is that these books or these nation states that are inside of the Forgotten Realms aren't necessarily all that different from each other. They're different from each other the way that, I don't know, like France and Spain are different from each other. Now, those two are closer together, so they tend to have a little bit more in common. But there's differences. But then if you compare France and Spain to, say, Greece and Turkey, well, now you're starting to get a little bit more differences. But they're all still kind of fundamentally nation states. And so, and then if you compare those to India, or you compare those to, Asian-based countries, they're all still countries. They're normal. There's not like a Kishi theme. They're just people that live there. But so some people might say, a lot of these countries feel the same. I don't understand the difference between them. And it's because it's not beating you over the head with it about being like, this is the vampire nation. This is the, primitive nation. This is the robot nation. This is the, which is what, in my personal opinion, this is the pirate world. It's not like that. Let me see here. I'm just catching up here with the people thing here. So that was all in reaction to Mateo saying anything but FR. Jackal says, is Tuesday going to be a Pathfinder 2nd Edition PC2 Southern Beaches hype stream? Well, Jackal, the plan is that I am going to put together a quick little video that we can do to promo and to pump up people for Southern Beaches. I think we'll probably wait another week or two. So we have a lot of people who've been playing Pathfinder 2 in the server. And then maybe we'll even get some people on and we'll talk about the classes. We'll talk about PC2. We'll talk about the changes and what people like. And if they feel like they're really doing it well. So we'll probably do the hype first, and that'll be like a video. But I would absolutely be 100% on board with doing some sort of live stream, even having guests, patron guests, to talk about Player Core 2. Thank you, Matthew. Kyle says, I have to kind of agree on the note of Forgotten Realms. Oh, you poor people. Okay, 4th edition Neverwinter was great. Profound Dark, that was a good book. 4th edition, I didn't even mind the Player's Guide. Player's Guide gave us one of the coolest classes in 4th edition, right? Which was the Sword Mage, which I think is just so cool. Sword Mage. Anyways, 5e teaches this is just the Sword Coast. Damn. 3.5 is the only thing I know about Forgotten Realms, and it wasn't that bad. No, it was pretty good. Yeah, the Spell Plague thing was rough. Kalana was rough. I have the original Forgotten Realms campaign set for first edition. Love it. So I first got Forgotten Realms. In fact, I can actually distinctly remember this. I just started playing D&D. I've probably been playing like a year or two, not even. And this was during second edition. So it was probably, let's see, I was in probably like 7th or 8th grade. So, it might have been like 94, give or take, 94, 95, somewhere in there. And up at the comic book store, they had the second edition Forgotten Realms box set. I can still remember exactly what it looked like. It was like $30. And my mom used to play bingo. She won, and she gave me like $50 because she won like, $1,000 or whatever. So she gave me $50. I went to the comic book store. I bought Forgotten Realms campaign setting for second edition. And it was one of the greatest things I ever owned to this day. Now where that box is long since disintegrated. I still have the maps. I still have the soft cover books, but the box itself did not survive the last 25 years, unfortunately. London coming to the defense of Galarian. All right, I'll buy from you, London. You would know better than me, so I'll buy from you. Kalana says, that 3.5 book is one of my husband's most prized possessions. It's one of my most prized possessions, so much so that I have two. I love that book. Let's see. Nober says, it's funny because I started my campaign in the Mwangi Expanse because it felt like, what's interesting? I actually kind of agree with that. I own the Mwangi Expanse Lost Omens book. I've read it. Well, not all of it, but I've gone through a lot of it. And I agree with you. It doesn't feel like it has the gimmicks as much. I agree. Actually, Nober, I actually completely agree with you there. As a reminder, if you want to join our Patreon, patreon.com/nightslastcall. I know we've been talking about Player by the Apocalypse and we've been talking about Legend of the Five Rings. But if you want to play Pathfinder 2nd Edition, we've kicked off an incredible mega campaign this week. And it's awesome. You automatically level up. Everybody gets to be the same level, but there's still rewards for playing and getting cool treasure. Actually, as soon as this stream is over, I have to randomly generate what items are going to be available in the Magic item art for next week. It's going to be really, really cool. I think everyone's going to have a lot of fun with it. And it runs throughout the end of the year. And then, you can join at the $10 level. And then you get to play Pathfinder 2nd Edition with like 40, 50, 60 people who I think we had 15 or 16 games this week alone. So it's a small community, but it's big enough that like you can get a game and there's different things and you get to see different things and play with different people. But it's small enough that you really feel like you can wrap your head around it. It's not like there's 10,000 people and you'll never understand what's going on. It's like, it feels like a really, really, really big campaign, which I think is great. This stream reminded me to buy Strike and 13th Age. You owe me like $40. Well, listen, next time we hang out, buddy, dinner on me. All right. Negative says, I've literally never accepted spell play canon in my own Forgotten. Well, I luckily have not played D&D since 4th edition. Really. I didn't really play 5th edition. So in my mind, I never had to deal with that. But I would ignore that as well as being part of the canon because they undid it in the stupidest way too. They undid it, which is also very, very stupid. Kalana is a moon elf druid from Everesca. The Zentarum learned to fear her, and I know what that means. Everesca is sort of like the Rivendell of the Elven estates, because of course the Elven home nation was based in Cormanthor, which is kind of like the Great Wood and the Green Wood, and the elves are traveling west, and then on the western edge of Anarok, on the eastern edge of the High Forest, you have this hidden elven abode called Everesca, which is helping the elves get to Evermeet, which is basically Valinor, which is where all the elves live. Anyways, fun stuff. You guys want to see something crazy one day? We'll have to look. I have let me see if it's up here on my bookshelf. I don't see it. I have this. I have this book. It's like from AD&D 2nd edition, and it's called like Evermeet, and it's basically like where the elf gods live, and like where the elves go when they do the retreat. And it's got like some of the most ridiculous broken magic items in it you've ever seen. Anyways, you talked a little bit last week about FF1ing Fabula Ultima. What are some changes that you're thinking of making? Taking the accuracy hits from the fight command? Yeah. So the main thing that I would want to do when I FF1ify Fabula Ultima would be I would want to get rid of which again I don't know if it can be done, Jackal, because it's think I would want armor to be I would want defense to be like armor absorption, and like absorb damage, and I would want evade to be something where it represents how likely you are to get hit, and I would want attacks to basically hit most of the time or almost all the time. More similar to the way that in Final Fantasy 1, your fighter got hit like every single time, but he has such awesome defense from his armor that he would only take a handful of damage. And in theory, you had characters like the ninja or the black belt who didn't have a high defense, but they had a high evade percentage. So I like playing off those base concepts. But really what it comes down to, though, is I don't like, you only get one thing to do in Fabula Ultima. You only get one thing. You get one action. And missing, and again, part of me understands that part of the reason they put missing in that game, I think, I don't know that Emmanuel has said this, but the game gives you so many different ways to re-roll or to add a bonus to your attack, right? Through your bonds, through your identity, your aspect, your whatever, your role. What's it called? Your what's the anger, pride, whatever, the thing that motivates you. You have so many different ways to re-roll, and you have so many different ways to add bonuses. It's almost like they want there to be a chance to hit because or they want there to be a chance to miss. That way, when you miss, there's a reason for you to go, and I call upon, my bond with this person, or I call upon my connection to my homeland, or my core identity is I am the unbeatable swordsman, and so I am going to draw upon that to reroll and spend my Fabula point. So their theme, thank you, Kalana, theme. And so introducing a chance to miss so that basically you have a reason to spend your points so that you don't miss, and then it kind of feels cool because you got to do that, is in theory kind of the idea. That being said, I don't know about your guys' games, but the handful of times that we played Fabula Ultima, it hasn't been much. Somebody would be like, well, this I want to hit. And they'd be like, all right, well, I call up, I missed, so I'm going to spend a Fabula point on my identity and re-roll. And then they miss again. They're like, well, I'm going to re-roll. I spend another Fabula point. I have it. So re-roll, re-roll, re-roll. It can feel a little bit kind of silly sometimes. But that was basically my idea, is that I wanted to, my two core problems with Fabula Ultima, and they're not problems because the game is totally fine. It's totally great. My two core problems are just me issues. One, I don't want to roll dice. I still don't want to roll dice. And two, I don't want to. I don't want the players to miss in a game where you get one thing to do on your turn. I know the combat rounds are very quick. I know that they come around really quick. I know that for all the reasons I just said, there's a reason why missing isn't that bad, because you can probably re-roll if you really need to. But when you only get one thing to do on your turn, just missing, and then in that game, missing is, and you did nothing and your turn's over next. I don't know if I love it. I also worry about, the pressure on a healer to just cast like 3 target heal, everybody heal 40. That's my turn next. And like, not only is your turn very quick, not only is your turn just healing everybody, but your turn is like over in like 5 seconds, which you could say is a good thing. But if other people's turns are taking like a minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes, suddenly you're like, wait a second, I'm only getting like 2% of the time here at the table. At least when you like roll a cure light wound spell or something, you're rolling a bunch of D8s and you get some sense of satisfaction. But to just be like, you, everybody heal, you 3 heal 40, and then you just subtract the MP, and then you're like, that's it, and done. I don't know how good that feels. But I haven't played the game nearly as extensively as you all have, so I completely, I revoke my opinion here. Matthew says, I'm fairly new to the hobby, started 4.5 years ago as a 5e GM. Got the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide, felt like it was pretty limited, so I just went with my own jank setting instead. And there's nothing wrong with that, Matthew, and you're part of a very long storied history of Dungeon Masters who've been doing that for 50 years. I think they could have been a better done job with the campaign setting book, considering it's the default setting. Yeah, I just think historically those haven't really sold that well, which is probably why they do most things based off of money. Plenty of other ways if you don't want to play Pathfinder, such as the much anticipated Dragon Tide. Yes, Dragon Tide, of course, did get delayed. It came out later, anyways. But I had a lot of stuff happen to me, and then we were really like, okay, we really want to get these Northern Reaches players something that they can play with and engage with this year. So, but now that that's launched, once we get this promo cut, I'm pretty much going to be working on Dragon Tide. I love that we're house ruling for FU. Never reduce damage to 0 because otherwise you're breaking the fiction of the hit. I mean, in Final Fantasy 1, the fighter or the knight or whatever would always take 1 point of damage. I mean, it's mostly, it's mostly semantics at that point. Vin says, lol, yep, the idea that everyone only does one thing does speed things up, but it also creates some weird game feel. And I agree with that. Emma said in a Discord that usually a full heal should be needed about every other round, which should give your healer some option to do some other stuff. And by that, I mean a cast of heal, not everyone near 0 hit points. Yeah, it's just, here's part of my problem, ultimately. I in a game where I feel like every player, let me tell a WoW story. I was never like a WoW raider or anything like that. But the last character that I played to the highest level was back in Mists of Pandaria, so a long time ago. But I was a priest. I was a dwarf priest. And in WoW, World of Warcraft, a priest can be one of 3 paths. You could be a path of shadow, a shadow priest, and that was a damage dealer, and they cast dark magics and stuff like that. The other 2, fundamentally, were healers. One was called the healing path, and the other one was called the discipline path. And I got to be honest with you, when my character would be like, soloing or, playing with like another group with another healer, I would swap my spec out to be a shadow priest so I could get to do some cool damage. But when I was in my healer mode and I was doing dungeons and heroic dungeons, and again, I did not raid. I was not part of a raiding guild, but I did the dungeons. I did the heroic dungeons. I was always a discipline priest. I was always a disco priest. Always. When I did PvP, I was always a disc priest. And the reason is because the core fundamental thing of the disc priest was this spell called Power Word Shield. And Power Word Shield, let me be clear about this. So basically, in D&D terms, it gives them a bubble of temporary hit points, basically. But the key thing about it, for me, the reason why I played it, is because it was way more engaging because it was proactive, not reactive. And that's the biggest problem I have with healing in most TTRPGs. It's a problem I have with most healing in most RPGs, but also in TTRPGs, is I don't always want to be reacting. I want to be proactive, and I want to be able to sort of, understand. And so me like going, I'm going to put a bubble of, because there was a limited duration. If it, wasn't like, you get these temporary hit points and they last forever. No, like it'd be like, imagine if like your heal spell was more like you could put a huge buffer of temporary hit points onto one party member, but it only lasts, 1 or 2 combat rounds, right? And so you got to kind of like plan it and like, and anticipate it. And then also too, like the people can play into it. Like, that guy just got a bunch of aggro. I know he's going to get, jammed up. I know that a bunch of attacks are going to go to him. Boom, hit him with the bubble, hit him with that proactive healing. And the thing about it was, as a discipline priest, at least, it was more mana efficient for me to prevent the damage than it was for me to then heal it once they had become damaged. So I felt like the game was rewarding me for making good choices about who to shield or who to bubble or who not to. And so I really enjoyed that playstyle because I felt very engaged instead of just being like looking at people's health bars and going, who's lowest / who's taking the most damage, with threat and aggro, and then just, clicking on them, Pain suppression is another good one. Exactly. So I like doing things in because to be fair, like pain suppression was like this massive damage reducer. So you throw it on a party member, they took a lot less damage. So if you were fighting a boss and that monster was about to drop a big attack, okay, or you could, you read the signs, you threw the pain suppression out before that happened, and now your tank lives through the big mega bomb or whatever. Or if you suddenly see that your mage has pulled aggro and 3 mobs peel off of the tank and start rushing for the mage, they're not there yet, but they're going to get there. And you're like, I don't know if the off tank or the tank is going to be able to peel quickly enough. You throw that pain suppression in advance, and try to save that person's life. So to me, I haven't played WoW in so long. I have no idea what exactly you're talking about now. I think Discipline Priest was in it from the beginning of Classic, as I recall. I played a rogue in Classic, but anyways, I just think that spending your turn healing isn't the most fun. Even for people who like support characters, I just think we need to rethink about how we cast support spells and how we handle that role of the party member. 4th edition, to be very clear, did a very good job, with this. It gave the leaders, which are the healers, very easy access to a form of healing, which they could do as a minor action, which meant that they could move, they could do something else, like a cool attack or a cool thing, and then also heal. So it's like the idea was that they were just healing on the side, and they still got to do other things on the side as well. Not all games are combat sims. That's true, but a lot of them are. And a lot of people like those games, George. And there's a reason why Pathfinder 2nd Edition and D&D far outsell Fabula Ultima. And even this can be a game oftentimes about combat. So, but so it is, you are right, but also, Mebaman says, I'm reminded of Final Fantasy 14 where I was healer, but it was more preventing damage. There's a Final Fantasy 14 RPG out, which Ben has said is amazing, and I do need to take a look at it. But I really want to take a look at it with Smith, because Smith, is a huge Final Fantasy 14 player. I've never played the game, and so it'd be really interesting to get his take on it as we're going through it. Lesson learned: proactive protection is more fun than reactive healing. I think so. I think it's way cooler. You need a show on what we mean when we say support characters. Combat starts. It's my turn. Wizard, what do? I cast haste on the fighter. What else? I'm going to move over here. That's my turn. That's a support character. Bard, what are you going to do on your turn? I am going to cast Soothe on the injured healer. And then, of course, obviously, my third action is going to be spent doing Inspire Courage. Next, that's a support character. Not taking actions so that other people can be cool. Eldamon in general could use a deeper look at it because, the life element, there's a lot of cool ideas in that game. Strike separating role and class actions also good for healers because it's 4th edition design and based. Leopold von Demuth. If games embrace stamina as the more regular thing that depletes in combat and wounds is the rare thing, there would be no in-combat healers, which is a weird trope when you think about it. I agree, and I agree. Support characters, but these are only really in combat sim games was my point. Yeah, but the other problem though is, George, is in any game where there is combat, especially if combat doesn't occur often, if the cost for losing a conflict is very high, then people will always make that game about combat because that's the one situation where they could die, they could TPK, they could lose completely. So even if it's an irregular thing, in a weird way, it almost becomes more important because if you ignore it, then and you don't have access to healing, and you don't have access to abilities, then then it becomes a problem. Now, ironically, in Fabula Ultima, you really shouldn't worry about healing in theory because nobody can die. Everybody can just surrender. But that still has game consequences, and theoretically, you do care about the succeeding in the narrative, succeeding in the plot arc, and succeeding in your character's arc. And if you're just losing all the time because nobody's healing, your character's not dying, but you keep surrendering. I guess you'll have a lot of Fabula points. Yes, George has a point. But people do like combat. In fact, George, I think one of the big problems that a lot of people have with a lot of all these other games is they go, yeah, It looks awesome. I love it. But where's the combat? But where the combat at though? You know, like that's what they're like. They want the combat again and again and again. Right. That's true. That's true, Lance. Everyone does have potions. They do have IP. But it's way more like efficient to heal because like if I cast heal and I target a bunch of people, it drains my MP, but then that only might be like 1 magic potion worth, but I got 3 heals worth out of it. So I still think it's more efficient. Kyle is correct. People like combat and numbers go burr. These are 2 things that have to be accepted. As much as I would love to rail against that and say that is wrong, that is self-confessing makes us hard. Yeah, I'm still going. I'm still hanging out. I was gonna kick off about a half an hour ago, but then people started saying really cool things, and I really liked it. As a random aside, one of my dreams I have to get the absolute right people for it because I know some people in my Discord by like just out of sheer absolute refusal won't play Monster Hearts. But I really want to create a game. I want to mix Avatar with Thirsty Sword Lesbians with Monster Hearts. Like Monster Hearts is great, but this game was, created in like 2008 and I love it. But it is a little long in the tooth, if you know thing. But Thirsty Sword Lesbian has some like really great Monster Hearts inspired thing. It's just, a little bit more swashbuckling, not teenage supernatural romance. And what I want to take from Avatar is I actually want to use the balance track, but instead, and this is actually taking inspiration from Vampire the Masquerade. Right? And again, I'm not the Vampire the Masquerade expert, but taking inspiration from Vampire the Masquerade is they had this idea of this humanity score in Vampire, and it sort of measured like, how much were you giving into the beast, and how much were you, being controlled by your baser urges. And so I like the idea of using the balance track idea from Avatar with your monsters, and they're sort of torn between their humanity and their monstrous side. And this game already has this idea of the darkest self. And so it's like taking that idea and like adding it to the balance mechanics. I think that'd be really cool. All right, George, take care, buddy. Good seeing you. But yeah, Steve, we were saying about how we need to do like another Eldamon stream and get into some of the mechanics that Mark created for the different Eldamon types. Sanjeev, Just of Dawn, wanted to ask you if you've played Burning Wheel. I have. I've never played it with my home group as like an ongoing campaign, but I have played it at conventions. Usually pretty lightweight games. It used to get played a lot at indie games on demand, but I have played Burning Wheel, but only in these limited convention environments. No, London. I do have to drop off. In fact, I should have dropped off already. But yeah, so I think we're going to do this week. I don't know what we're going to do for the one stream on Tuesday, but for Thursday, we'll probably do another stream about the campaign settings. And I can't remember what I named that series, but I don't remember what I called it. But anyways, we'll let the patrons vote. And in the meantime, I look forward to more awesome stories coming out of Southern Beaches, and look forward to finishing up Dragon Tide with Bob and getting that launched. And boy, so many cool, great games. Our Forbidden Lands campaign did not wrap up this week because Tim couldn't get a babysitter. I want everybody to be there for the final session. And then next week, Smith's out. So I was hoping to finish it by the end of summer. I think when's the last day of summer? Like September 17th or something. So Smith's out the 13th. Okay, so the September 20th, I think might be the last day of summer, the first day of fall. So if we can finish the campaign by September 20th, maybe we will have succeeded in finishing up. But, we'll see. And then what we play next is anybody's guess. I don't know. Could be 5th edition. It could be 5th edition. We could go back to 3rd edition. We'll see what the group wants to play. I'd love to get some of my buddies like Rich and stuff like that who used to play with us and get them out and get them playing with us. George, I'd love to see Ross come out and come play with us. It'd be so much fun, especially with the rate that we're playing these days. It wouldn't be that difficult. All right, everybody. Well, thanks for hanging out with me tonight. I hope you have a great week. I look forward to seeing you on the Discord if you're a member of the Patreon. And thank you, everybody, for hanging out tonight and throwing some support my way. Big shout out to the Self-Confessed Cynic for several super chats. GM Scott for his contributions to the stream, including a big $50 tip. And GM Scott and Self-Confessed Cynic also re-upping 28 months of supporting the adventure. And, that is another thing that I'd love to bring back to this channel is us playing games. We didn't do one in 2024, unfortunately, but with the studio move out and then the craziness of the summer, but fingers crossed that we'll get to playing again. And who knows, maybe we'll figure out a game that we could play with some of our friends. I've always had a blast whenever we've had the patrons on, Damien, Donnie, Vin. So it'll be Quest for the Frozen Thrift Season 2. Let's go, Hi Kid. Probably not. That's probably not going to happen. But anyways, all right, everybody. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you next time on Night's Last Call. Good night, everybody.